Hurrdat Sports presents the Damon Benning Show with Ravi Lulla.
Awaiting the snap, Gino takes it, steps up in the pocket, scrambles away to his right side, looking to the end zone, fires a dart in the back of the end zone. DK, does he have his feet in? He does! Touchdown, Seahawks! DK Metcalf with the rope-a-dope in the back of the end zone. Seattle looks like they want to rush 4. And they do. Jones is going to throw. Throws near side. Ball picked up. Witherspoon comes near side. Down the sideline. Jones chasing him. He cuts back inside. Picks up blockers. Still being chased. Witherspoon far side. 20, 15, 10, 5. He is in. Holy catfish. Witherspoon went a mile and a half with the interception for a touchdown.
We've got to get to the point where we go out and play. And it doesn't matter if I'm getting double teamed as a D lineman. It doesn't matter what the call is. It doesn't matter if we're down 14-0. We got to play. And that's the winning mindset. And whereas the guys have to, again, kind of probably not listen to everything that's out there, what you should be doing. There's no you should be doing, at least in this building. It's like, go play. It's a football game. So, Steve, I expect we have some really good players. They're going to play in the National Football League. They need to show up. They need to show up. Like the good players from Michigan, I can tell you who they were because I watched them on the field, okay? Our really good players need to show up. And that's not me calling anybody out. That's me giving them confidence that I believe they can do it. There's a big difference, right? I'm not calling anybody out by name. We have guys that I believe on our team can absolutely wreck a game, and I want to see them wreck the game.
Welcome in and good morning. That's a good start to the day. Welcome in and good morning on the Damon Benning Show with Ravi Lulla. Avery Howard in for Damon this morning. We're at the Hurrdat Sports Bar and Grill at the H&H Chevrolet studio. Avery, how are you this morning?
Good. A little bit earlier than my usual, but it's good.
It is a little bit of an adjustment when you get to work when it's still dark. Not always the best way to start your morning, but hopefully we can pick things up for you here in a little bit. Before we get started, I do want to let all the fine folks know that we have a new sponsor.
Ooh.
We are now powered by Cornhead Lager. So anytime you were ever like watching a Nebraska game and you're thinking to yourself, okay, I've been drinking this beer, we've been playing well, I'm helping the team out. Well, Cornhead Lager, you can literally help the team out because every beer you drink helps support the 1890 initiative. Okay. It is the beer that helps fund the NIL program for Nebraska. So you're literally helping out Nebraska football when you're drinking your beer. So I don't know what else I can tell you to sell this thing. You get beer, good. You help Nebraska, good. It's a win for everybody.
Yeah, seems on brand.
Yeah,
as Nebraska as could get.
It is a very Nebraska thing to have beer fund your NIL. But I love it. I think it's terrific. So we appreciate Cornhead Lager for being a part of the program. And we appreciate you for being part of the program as well. You can listen to us on AM 590 ESPN Omaha, ESPN Tri-Cities, of course, YouTube, Twitter, podcasts, all the places. And you can join the show on the Warhorse Sportsbook hotline, 888-638-4876. Set the lineup for you here real quick. It's going to be me and Avery solo for about the first hour and a half. Then we'll talk to our guy, Steve Gardner. He is a baseball writer for USA Today. Then we will start our Illinois previews with Robert Rosenthal from IlliniBoard.com. We've talked to Robert before, terrific guy. Mike J. Schaefer, who I'm sure I'll argue about with something today at 9 o'clock from Husker 24/7. And then we will wrap up the show with a little more Big Ten with Jeff Ermann from InsideMDSports.com. He will talk to us about Maryland football. 5-0 Maryland, undefeated Maryland.
It's unbelievable.
Maybe the toughest game left on Nebraska's schedule, Maryland, which feels weird to say out loud. Yeah. It is it's not a gauntlet the rest of the way, Avery.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, like, it feels weird to say, right? Because Nebraska's not in a place where you can just be like, oh, that's a win. But you look at the rest of the schedule.
Yep.
And there's not any teams on there. Like, there's no more Michigans left out there.
There's not.
There's a lot of Minnesotas, basically,
Right. There is. Yeah. I mean, when you look at it, I think the back end, the very end, when you have a Maryland, Wisconsin, Iowa stretch, I think that's the true test.
Yeah, that's a little trickier,
right?
For
That's,
sure.
I mean, when you look, but you still have the middle portion, which is the next 3-4 weeks that maybe on paper, these would be Big Ten wins that you should have.
Yeah.
But I don't think the word should is necessarily in Nebraska's vocabulary yet.
No, I put them as winnable games.
Yeah.
Should win. Nebraska hasn't earned that
Right.
yet.
Agree.
But I mean, even the last 3 games, right? You look at Iowa. Is Iowa scary without Cade McNamara? Did
Right.
they scare you with Cade McNamara?
Right. Yeah.
I mean, Wisconsin is struggling a
Mhm.
little bit. They've looked pretty average against some pretty average teams. Not to say that they aren't ahead of Nebraska at this point still, but that feels way more winnable than I thought it was going to be at the beginning of the season.
Yeah. You know, the thing that's interesting, I think it'll probably lead us into our next conversation a little bit, but I think when you look at the schedule, I think connotation to the team names has a big impact on Nebraska's program still. And I think that what we're going to talk about is just what Coach Rule talked about yesterday was mentality and mindset. And I think that's one of the biggest things that Nebraska has to get over the hurdle of, like the belief system with like hearing that, you know, we believe that you can win, but then believing the belief, if that makes sense. Because when you look at the games in the middle of the schedule, when you look at Illinois and you look at Northwestern, Purdue, and Michigan State, I don't think those names necessarily hold as much weight as the ones at the end, despite even if those last 3, Maryland, Wisconsin, Iowa, are performing at the level that we're used to them being at. I feel like it's just the mental of getting over what maybe some of those names mean.
Right.
Because for so long, that's been, I mean, still, as we heard yesterday, for quite a long spiel, it's the mindset.
Well, and I think with part of that, and we're jumping way ahead on the schedule here, but with part of that, I think beating Iowa last year really helps, right? Because Iowa's not the boogeyman anymore.
Right.
Wisconsin's still kind of the boogeyman a little bit.
Right.
But beating Iowa, you've got a lot of guys on this team that beat Iowa last year. That, I think, helps a ton in that mental shift and believing you could actually do it. Because I don't know that before last year, a ton of those guys, like deep down, actually believed they could beat Iowa because they just hadn't. I don't know if a ton of these guys believe they can beat Wisconsin, but all the guys believe they can beat Iowa now because they've done it.
Right.
Or they've seen them do it last year against a better Iowa team probably than they are this year. I would say. I mean, close at the very least.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think you're right there. And I think that's, you know, Coach Rule talked about this yesterday. And we're going to get into a lot of the audio because he had a lot to say. He went about 25 minutes yesterday. But one of the things he was talking about is he felt like, I'm going to give my summation. You tell me if you agree, disagree.
Okay.
I felt like he was saying they played tight.
Yeah. Yeah.
And some people thought that was they didn't play fast or they came out flat. I didn't take it that way at all. I thought they came out and were trying. I thought their effort was good. I just thought it was tight. And so part of that is, yes, they've got the number 2 by their name in Michigan, but they also have Michigan by their name.
Yeah.
Right? Like if Michigan State was ranked number 2 in the country, I bet they don't come out as tight. But it's Michigan, right? They're in the college football playoff 2 years in a row. They're probably even better this year. Like I kind of think that goes into the mentality thing you were talking about, where you get a little psyched out by the name, not just the players.
Yeah, like if they came out in a different uniform, would it change something?
Yeah.
But that's not the reality of the situation. It's you have to face
whoever's on your schedule.
Whoever's on the schedule, despite what the name is, despite what the number is next to it. But I do think you bring up a point there because I think a lot of people were questioning Nebraska's effort.
Yeah, which I didn't love. I didn't love that line of thing because I just didn't think it was accurate.
Yeah.
Like I didn't see guys dogging it. You know, if their effort wasn't there, they don't score with however many minutes left in the game, right? Like I didn't feel like they ever packed it in.
Yeah.
You know, and so that bothered me a little bit because I kind of thought it was sort of low-hanging fruit. Like, oh, they didn't play well. They didn't really compete. Oh, it must have been an effort issue. It's like, I don't know. It's an effort issue. I thought it was a talent issue more than anything. Like, I thought there was a huge talent gap between Nebraska and Michigan. Is that kind of, I mean, where was your head at in terms of what you saw in terms of just the biggest issue on Saturday?
You know, I think it's interesting you say that because yes, I do think there's a talent gap. Like we've discussed, Rule didn't necessarily think so. And I also don't think it's I don't think it's the lack of talent that Nebraska has. I think it's, I think their talent gap has grown. Watching it, they seem the biggest separation because of consistency. When you'd watch the players that are on a pregame scout, those were still the players that were performing. Where when you look at Nebraska, it's like, watch out for these guys, but it's kind of like, will they show up? And I know that's kind of echoing what Rule clearly said, but I also just think consistency also for this Michigan squad they've had for almost 10 years with the coaching staff and Coach Harbaugh being there, right? So as much as you want to say like there's definitely a player separation, there's also, we've talked about this a ton, but the whole new regime of coaches coming in multiple times for this group of players, you know, they're relearning things so much that I feel like, yes, talent gap, but also just Michigan's players have had so much consistency. They have their identity. They know what that is. And I think, but I mean, Rule said it plain and simple. Like the guys that are going to step up. Our guys still haven't had that necessarily. And I think the consistency also comes from the mindset. Like you've had a coaching staff previously that what was being instilled? Was there a belief system being instilled?
We don't really know.
Question mark.
Could leave that up for debate.
We'll leave it there. So now it's like, it feels like ground zero, we're learning so many things, technical, tactical, but also like letting these players know that like you are a good player. Like you have the capability to do what that guy on that side does too. Where I think Michigan's had, they don't have to tell those guys that.
Yeah, they just know.
They just know
at this point. And that's a good point. I mean, you know, we've talked about the Mekhi Bayer situation a lot, but that's a guy that literally walked into Rule's office and was like, "Do you even want me here?"
Right. I think
now he's a starter.
Right. And I think there's like multiple of those on Nebraska.
I mean, even like, Harburg's like, "Should I be a tight end?"
Yeah. I even think too, like a relationship that I've really been intrigued in is Luke Reimer and Coach Rule. Like, it's not that Reimer was not an impact on this team previously, but like it's almost with every single press conference, every single time that a coach talks, like his name is out of their mouth all the time. Like Coach Rule has even said, like, he's changed my experience here. And he's been here less than a year. Like, I think there's just guys that, you know, were either pretty good, mediocre, under the radar, have become some of our guys on the team. And so I think it's just been really interesting to see how the consistency or belief on a coaching staff for a short period of time has already kind of proven itself a little bit, but I'm curious to see where that goes even further when that, you know, that regime, that identity, that coaching staff is here for an extended period of time.
Established a little bit longer. Yeah, it's interesting because I know, you know, we think about, oh, it's a new head coach, it's all this or whatever, but like on the offensive side of the ball, you're talking about a third OC in 3 years.
Right.
You know, like that's even more turnover than maybe we even think about sometimes. I mean, if you want to throw Mickey in there you know, you're talking about, or 3 head coaches, 3 OCs. You know, it's a even 3 defensive coordinators because Chenander got fired midway through last year and Bill Busch took over. There's a ton of turnover that has happened within the coaching staff, aside from the fact that just making the change from Frost to Rule. And so it's a good point because while Michigan has had some changes in their coordinator spots and stuff like that, because it happened kind of further into Harbaugh's tenure, sort of the track record and was already established for them. They kind of knew what to expect. And it's a, you know, the consistency thing that you bring up is interesting because a lot of times I equate consistent performance with higher talent, and that's not always the case, right? So, you know, I was on the No Block, No Rock podcast last night, and those guys were fun.
Yeah.
But we were talking about, one of the guys brought up Kyle, I think, who works for us now.
Yes.
I don't meet a lot of people at the office because I'm always here.
Yes, confirmed he does.
I was like, I'm pretty sure the guy works with me technically. But, you know, he brought up how a lot of these kind of what people refer to as sort of coin flip plays, whether it's like 50-50 balls or hustle plays or like these penalties or plays that seem to be either effort related or luck related or whatever of these things. And I go, yeah, those are all talent issues to me. Like a 50-50 ball is only 50-50 when the receiver is as good as the DB.
You think so?
A lot of times, yeah. And the quarterback is good enough to put the ball in a spot where it is a 50-50 ball.
Okay.
Like the difference between a 50-50 ball and an interception is where the quarterback puts it, or how the receiver plays the ball, or how the receiver kind of boxes out the cornerback on some of those things, right? And so I think on some degree, those plays are talent plays. If you've got a better wide receiver, it goes from being maybe a 50-50 ball to maybe a 60-40 ball in your favor, right? There's some guys that and you've seen this. There's some guys you throw the ball up there and you're like, that's not a 50-50 ball. He's getting that.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And that to me is a talent issue a lot of the time. But you bring up a really good point, and sometimes it's a performance consistency issue too. Because you can be, and this not to bring up our generational talent discussion here, you can be really talented and not produce at the level that your talent would dictate.
Yeah, because there's players, no matter what the sport is, that they are your best player, but you don't know what you're going to get from them.
Yeah.
But then you have your other people who aren't as naturally gifted, but you know what you're going to get from every single time. So I think that's where maybe that's an interesting point, because I think when I think of plays that are not, I guess when you say 50-50, my head goes straight to soccer. But so in my mind, it's more desire more than talent, because there's a lot of time where 50-50 ball is not going to be winnable, but we're always taught just make it more difficult for the other player than at that point. And that, in my opinion, does not come down to talent at that point. That is an
effort play.
Right. Desire and effort at that point.
But if you have a higher level of talent, then if you make that effort, then you're going to get more of those 50-50 balls, right?
Yeah, understood.
And so that to me is, there's probably some of both in it, and I used this example, a few years, well, it's longer than a few years ago now. They'd sneak up on you. Creighton had this issue where they had a hard time winning close games. They had a hard time getting over the hump in the NCAA tournament. That's before the Elite Eight, before the Sweet 16, before they had made a run to the second weekend. And people are like, oh, Greg McDermott can't coach in big games. And he can't coach close games, can't win those type of games. And I looked at these people like they were crazy, because this was a pretty prevalent narrative. I go, this is a talent issue. Creighton never got the guards that everybody else got. You look at like some of their best players like Kyle Korver, Doug McDermott. Those guys were forwards. They weren't handling the ball all the time. And they pretty consistently had Missouri Valley guards. Even when they got into the Big East, they had some Missouri Valley guards, right? And the reason they weren't getting shots off at the end of the game or getting good looks at the end of the game or winning these close games is because they didn't have a ball handler at that level that could go and win it for them. And then you see what happens. Tyshawn Alexander shows up. Marcus Zagorowski shows up. Mitch Ballack shows up. You've got that group of guys kind of change the entire narrative of what Creighton basketball could be. And all of a sudden, they start winning close games. It's like, did Greg McDermott become a better coach? No, he got better players. He got players, and not even necessarily better players, because nobody's better than Doug McDermott's ever been at Creighton, right? But he got players that better fit the situation specifically that he needed help with. And so I think a lot of that in Nebraska can be a talent issue too, but you're right. You still have to put that effort in, right? Nebraska could have guys on the team right now that can make those plays. And I don't know that any of us know at this point. And I'm kind of curious when you hear, because Matt Rule seems to think they're on the roster.
Yeah.
When he says, hey, we've got players that can wreck games. And so my immediate thought, because I do this for a living, is, okay, who are those guys?
Yeah.
Like who are the guys that he's talking about? Because I don't know that I've looked at this roster and be like, yeah, that guy's a game changer. Have you? Because I don't know that I have.
I definitely do think there is a significant core of talent on this team.
I'd agree with that.
And so I think, it's interesting, because I also think when Coach Rule does these press conferences, he is speaking to the media and he knows people are listening, but he speaks as if his team is listening.
Yeah, he's talking to his team as much as anything.
Yeah. And so he always is very careful in the words he uses, because he's like, I know when this is received, at some point my players hear this or they're listening right now. I want them to take this the right way. And so it could have been this motivating message, be like, hey, I know you guys are out there. And because I'm not speaking to any one of you, I might be speaking to all of you. It's
because if he singles guys out, then maybe somebody else who thought of themselves in that way is like, oh, maybe I'm not that guy.
Yeah. And he doesn't love to do that, as we know. So, I think there's a few that probably come to mind that aren't maybe shocking, but like it. Two names that I feel like I thought I would hear more so far is MJ Sherman, Chief Borders.
Yeah, absolutely.
I feel like I would hear their last names called more. It's not that I don't think, like, I think they are two wonderful assets to this team.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I think just who they are off the field, what they bring to this team, and the culture has been, like, just observing it, fantastic.
Chief seems like a super great guy to have on the team, be around.
Yeah.
Like, and Coach Rule said as much.
Yes, 100%. And every single time MJ Sherman talks, like, I love listening to him talk. He's always got something interesting. He's always insightful. I think maybe that also comes with the pressure and expectation from the SEC.
I would say I think that's a big part of it.
Yeah, because when you look at their numbers in the past few years, like, obviously they came to Nebraska for more of an opportunity.
Yeah.
But they do have huge experiences where, you know, without a doubt, there's a gap from the SEC to the Big Ten. No matter how talented the Big Ten is, I think there's a significant enough of a gap from the SEC to Big Ten.
I would say there's definitely a gap between Nebraska and where those guys came from.
100%. I think when you look at it, though, you're like, okay, when I see that they're like, let's say they came from the Big 12, would we be as excited for them knowing that they came from the SEC?
So for me, it was more about Georgia and less for MJ Sherman and less about, because like if they had come from Kentucky,
okay, fair,
I'd probably be like, oh, that's nice.
Yeah.
And even Chief Borders from Florida versus Georgia, I feel differently about than I do MJ Sherman.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, that's true. And I think also you just associate maybe the coaching they've received
100%.
at those schools, and you know that they've been in national title games, you know they know how to play in pressure. I think also because of the performance, and I know it's inter squad and it's red white, but watching what especially MJ did, and I think even Chief at times in the spring game, I was like, okay, that's what I was looking forward to. Like big, physical, hard hitting. Like,
well, especially because I saw Cam show out in the spring game, and that translated.
Yeah,
you know, when he's been on the field, I was like, oh, this guy's awesome.
Right, and I think it's also the position that they're in, that jack position.
Sure.
You're waiting to hear their name like flying all over the field. Where I think on the flip side, it's not that we were not looking forward to watching Malcolm Hartzog play. He's lived up to, I feel like, that
our expectations.
Yeah, in certain aspects. Like it's him and Omar Brown that I hear making all these tackles. So I think it's, how do you get everyone on that defensive side to like really,
or Newsome even. We haven't heard Newsome's name
agree.
a ton,
That was
but
my
he's
other
played great.
He has played
but that's
good.
If you're a great cornerback, you're not going to hear your name played a ton.
Yep.
Because they're not throwing at you. Right.
That's fair. I would agree with that. And then I think the other one that I don't know, maybe it might not be a shock, but I still think it's Anthony Grant. Because I know that Coach Rule believes in him. I know the staff believes in him. I love watching EJ and AG interact before a game, because you can tell that EJ, like, that's his guy. Like he knows how to get in his ear. He knows how to get in his grill and fire him up. And I think it's just like, hey, like, you are the guy. Like when we give you the ball, go in and wreck the game. Like go do it. Like it's, like my dad when I was like,
nothing that we can't get through.
Yeah. Like my dad when I was like 8, 9 years old, he'd like pull me over and be like, go, we have to score. Go. Like, okay.
Go
gotta go right now. Right. So it's just
thing.
like they believe in him, and there's some ball security things, but like when we give you the ball, it's go time. Like and go believe that for yourself.
For sure. Really interesting stuff there. I want to get into that more because I'm curious. I wonder if there's any more of those skill positions on offense that have some of those game records, because that's kind of the place where everybody looks at and say, we need way more talent. And maybe some of it's already on the roster. We will get to that and more coming up on Benning and Lulla here on Hurrdat Sports Radio.
We'll be right back in 5 minutes. We'll be right back in 4 minutes. We'll be right back in 3 minutes. We'll be right back in 2 minutes. We'll be right back in 1 minute. We'll be right back in 30 seconds. Hurrdat Sports presents the Damon Benning Show with Ravi Lulla.
I feel very confident with Heinrich being the starting quarterback. That being said, I have a lot of confidence in Jeff. I know it's not probably a great answer, but we went out. We practiced last night, Sam. We practiced last night, and Jeff looked awesome. Jeff looked great. Heinrich looked great. Chubba looked good. So, I'm getting them both ready. But I have full confidence in Heinrich. In the midst of losing, and I know there's some batted passes and all that, but in the midst of losing, I saw things from Heinrich that I wanted to see. I saw him compete. I saw him and Billy work well versus man and win on some option routes. So I saw some things that I think we need to add to our run game. Just have to get the run game back to what it had been doing.
Welcome back to the Damon Benning Show with Ravi Lulla. Avarie Howard in for Damon this morning. Nebraska's been dealing with a bunch of injuries, and if you're dealing with a personal injury, you can call our friends over at Dyer Law. They can help you out either on the phone, 402-393-7529, or they can chat with you on their website at dyer.law. That's dyer.law. If you've got a personal injury accident, you can count on the Dyer Law team. Before we get back into our discussion here, we've got our friend Random Mike giving us a call on the Warhorse Sportsbook hotline. Mike, how are you this morning?
Hey, not too bad. I'm kind of intrigued by the quarterback situation. By the way, anything new on the Rizak front? What are you hearing?
Not yet. We're on constant Anthony Rizak watch, just trying to get my guy a Power 5 offer. But I will let you know as soon as I know.
Yeah, it's intriguing, and I don't think he has a sidearm motion. Am I right?
No, it's honest. So DB talked about this a couple weeks ago. He's a better prospect coming out of high school than Heinrich Haarberg was at this point in his career. So take that for whatever you will. I think Damon's right about that for what it's worth. I don't know what the holdup is. Maybe they just like the guys they have in the room. Maybe they want to go transfer portal. I don't know. But if you want to compare it to guys they have on the roster, he's a better prospect at this point in his career than Haarberg was.
Yeah, and we both agree he's throwing the ball a lot better than he did, for example, last year, don't you think?
Oh, without a doubt. His growth as a passer from when they started him as a sophomore to now has been enormous. Like, he still has some work to do on his mechanics, but the strides that he's already made are really, really impressive.
Okay, here's the thing about our three quarterbacks for Nebraska.
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Irrelevant, okay? If the draft were now and they knew what he would be as a pro quarterback, I'm talking about Purdy's brother, older brother, where do you think he's drafted? Rather than the last guy in the draft, where do you think he's drafted?
That's an interesting...
Knowing what they know now.
Yeah. That's an interesting question because the draft process for quarterbacks is so kind of goofy in the sense that they get so enamored with physical traits, right? That's why an Anthony Richardson goes where he is, despite what he put up on tape at Florida. So I bet he would go first round if they know what they knew now, but I bet it wouldn't be in the top half of the first round. I bet it'd be 15 or lower. It'd probably be a winning team that valued what he brought to the table, as opposed to a downtrodden franchise that's trying to hit a home run with the next, Patrick Mahomes or whatever, who, by the way, was drafted about the same spot that I would take Brock Purdy. But there's too many teams that get enamored with the physical aspects, and Brock Purdy just doesn't have those. So I think he'd go first round, but I don't think it'd be top half.
But I think he might be top half, but we'll never know. But he's a star now, and people, a lot of it is the mental thing. And my point is, he's in a lot of communication with his brother that's on the Huskers, and maybe that will play a role in how this thing transpires. But what I'd like to see, if Sims is healthy, to really go to kind of a two quarterback thing. Because those are physically, I'm talking about the quarterback run. How often did we use the quarterback run against a great team last Saturday?
I think Haarberg had 9 carries for -2 yards.
Yeah, and some of them were sacks, right?
Right, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and what I'm saying is they probably didn't run him as much because they didn't want to get him hurt because Sims isn't 100% and maybe Purdy isn't either. Do you see what I'm saying? In two of our national championship games, we played two quarterbacks. In Tom Osborne's first championship, remember who started and then who played later and then who finished?
Mm-hmm.
And then in Devaney's first we had two quarterbacks. And a lot of that was who was injured or who was hot. But isn't this a time when you got two quarterbacks that are maybe two of your fastest guys on the team to get them both in there because the quarterback run, with all the injuries we've had, let's use them both. This is a time where the benefits of two quarterbacks are better than liability if they're healthy.
Mike, appreciate the call. Yeah, that's a fair point. Because I think moving forward, Avarie, and you can tell me if you agree or disagree with this. I think they're probably going to need to get QB run pretty close to 20 times a game.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're splitting that between two guys, then it's obviously a dramatically less of a load physically on either of the guys, right?
Yeah.
And you could maybe even stretch that out to, if you're using both guys, maybe even stretch it out to 25 QB runs a game and not feel like you're overtaxing one guy or another.
I do think we'll see two quarterbacks play in a game at some point. I do think, it was asked yesterday, were you surprised with the length of recovery time for Jeff Sims? And he was like, when I hear high ankle sprain, I usually think 4 to 6 weeks anyway.
Yeah.
So I think maybe for most, fans, maybe hearing ankle sprain didn't transpire to 4 to 6 weeks.
That word high though is gonna.
It does, and I don't know if that was translated as this was just but whatever. It's been 4 to 6 weeks, and it seems like he is getting there. So I think within it seems like Rule has mentioned it more often that he has no problem with it, and he will do whatever it takes to win.
Yeah,
and if that means they bring two different looks, and even if those two different looks are still rushing, but they're different rushing looks,
mm-hmm.
I don't think he has a problem with it.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you brought that up, because somebody asked me recently what I actually thought the differences were between the two quarterbacks, because I think it's really easy to look at them and say like, oh well, they're both kind of run first guys. Although I think Sims thinks of himself more as a pass first
mm-hmm.
guy.
Agree.
I think Haarberg embraces the run first aspect of it a little bit more, but that's a mentality thing, not a physical thing so much. But I think a lot of people talked about the upside of Sims before, and then we see Haarberg break a couple really long runs that I frankly didn't know were in there. He's just such a big guy, you don't expect him to move like that. But then so we've got the home run threat with Sims, we've got the home run threat with Haarberg, both on the ground. And so I kind of started trying to go through what do I think the actual differences are in them physically. And so Haarberg is a more physical runner.
Yes.
He's kind of he seeks out contact almost.
Yeah.
He kind of runs like a fullback. To be honest.
Like he lowers a shoulder.
Like you could tell he was ready to be a tight end this year. And then Sims, I think, is a little more. I think Sims gets to his top speed faster, even if their top end speed is about the same.
Mm-hmm.
I think Sims gets to it faster. So there's some runs where Haarberg only gets 3 or 4 that Sims probably would have gotten 5 or 6
mm-hmm.
because he got to the spot faster.
Mm-hmm.
And then I still think Sims is a better natural thrower of the football.
Agree.
I don't think he always makes the right reads or the right decisions.
Right.
But I think when he throws the ball, it's more likely to go where he wants it to go.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas Haarberg, I don't totally know about his decision making yet, but I do know that it's not always accurate when it comes out of his hand.
I would agree with that.
So that's, to me, the differences between the two guys. But you can use both of those guys,
mm-hmm.
right? You can use Haarberg in, hey, this is kind of a 3rd and 3. We really want to have a physical, quarterback run game here,
mm-hmm.
that power spread option
mm-hmm.
that Coach Rule talked about. This is a good spot for
mm-hmm.
him. And then there's other situations where it's going to make more sense to have Jeff Sims in the game. So, I mean, Rule said it pretty explicitly yesterday. He'll do whatever it takes to win.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And I do think it's going to take both quarterbacks to win.
I do too. I also think, you made a good point in terms of, keeping players healthy. If, like you said, if it is a 3rd and 3 situation and you need another option and Hire can come in and they're not afraid of him taking a hit,
mm-hmm.
okay, then that makes sense, right? Where it's then, okay, now put Jeff back in to maybe, run things a tad bit differently. But
mm-hmm.
if in terms of preserving some injuries, I can see where that comes into play too, especially we'll see how comfortable Jeff Sims is running the ball aggressively coming after,
mm-hmm.
As much as I think there will be a sense of wanting to prove himself again and doing whatever it takes. I also think, you still in the back of your head are like, I don't want to re-sprain this. I'm not going to go into a run that Heinrich Haarberg usually goes into.
And maybe the more important thing about this is he going to have it in the back of his mind that I still want to prove I'm a passing quarterback?
Fair.
Because and we can talk about that coming up next, because I think that may be as much of a decider of who we see moving forward as his actual physical health. We will get to more of Benning and Lulla here on Hurrdat Sports Radio coming up next.
We will be back in 4 minutes.
One catch in 3 straight games for Illinois, and this is a touchdown. They put it in the hands of Josh McCray, and he puts it in the end zone. Touchdown, Illinois.
And Brightwell, and he got popped by the rookie Witherspoon. You talked about how physical. This one's picked. Back the other way, Witherspoon. Devin Witherspoon cuts back. What a night for the rookie. You think they love him in Seattle? How about 6 points? Touchdown Witherspoon, no flags.
Hurrdat Sports presents the Damon Benning Show with Ravi Lulla.
All right, yeah, we're right in the swing of things, getting ready for Illinois Friday night on a short week. So we got a lot of work done yesterday, and adjusting the week to get ready for a Friday night game.
Welcome back to the Damon Benning Show with Ravi Lulla, Avery Howard in for Damon Benning. And I want to tell you about our friends at Big Brothers Big Sisters. Their mission is to support one-to-one mentoring relationships that ignite the power and promise of youth. Go to mentoromaha.org to sign up and become a big, or if you're like me, don't really like hanging out with kids that much, you can go to mentoromaha.org donate money, donate tickets to events or matches or whatever for bigs that have already signed up to hang out with kids, because that's not really my cup of tea. But I do want to help out still, just from a arm's length. I'm more of a help from a distant type guy. But go to mentoromaha.org to learn more about Big Brothers Big Sisters and all the legitimately terrific work they do for kids in the community.
I feel like that kind of surprises me, like coaching and love being around like youth, like athletes and stuff.
I like sports a lot.
Okay.
I don't like kids very much. Honestly, that's why I don't coach anymore.
Okay.
So I coached high school for 1 year and was like, oof, this is rough.
Okay.
So then I went and coached college for 9 years. And
so you went more the grown-up route.
Yeah, and they were not that much more grown up, to be totally honest. They're just high school maturity with way more freedom, which is a terrible combination. So that wasn't great, honestly. And I told Damon this. I coached because I had these ideas about how basketball could be played, and I wanted to see if I was right.
Oh.
That was the only reason I coached.
Were you right?
Well, yeah, somebody else proved it before me.
Okay.
So I was like, honestly, that's kind of why I quit. I was like, oh, well, yeah, I was right, and I don't have to prove it. So it was like, I started watching the Grinnell, Iowa offense in like 2003, 2004, which is just this like system of basically they shoot only threes and layups. They full court press the entire game, and they try and turn you over as much as possible. Basically, they want to create as many possessions as possible.
Yep.
And they will actively give up layups if they don't get the ball back, if they don't get a turnover, because they just want the ball back as soon as possible, because their volume of threes will outweigh your layups when you don't turn the ball over.
Okay.
So it was this system, and basically my thought was, hey, if you ran this with better players, would it work? And so I didn't do the system exactly how they did it, but my thought was like, hey, if you put up a ton of threes, if you kind of basically you turn basketball into what Oregon's offense was trying to do with football in terms of like speeding up the game, getting more possessions, all that kind of stuff. I was like, I bet you could get that to work at a higher level. And then like the Warriors came along and kind of proved that. And I was like, oh, I don't have to do this anymore. So I was like, yeah, I'm good.
I'm out.
Which I still really liked. I really like talent evaluation. That's one of my favorite things to do.
Okay.
So I stayed in to do that a little bit longer. And I really liked doing the strength and conditioning stuff. So I stayed in and did that a little bit longer. But basically, I don't think I coached full-time on court after the Warriors won a championship. I was like, yeah, I'm good.
Check.
I'm not a super patient person.
Okay.
And you have to be incredibly patient to coach.
Yep.
And so I'm glad I realized that about myself before that became kind of my full-time career.
Mm-hmm.
But it was not for me.
Okay. I was just curious. Like I hear you and Damon joke about it, but I was like, what's the reason?
No, so the really funny thing is I used to be a nanny. Like in college, I was a nanny.
And you were scarred.
And so actually they were great kids. It wasn't even that. It was just as I got older, I was just like, yeah, I don't want to be around kids that much. Like that's just like in college, it was nice because it was a super easy job and like the kids were pretty chill and the parents were cool. And like it was a pretty low maintenance nanny situation. Whereas like as long as the kids are alive at the end of the day, like I have done my job. I wasn't like educating or anything like that.
Yeah.
Like some nannies are like cooking and cleaning and doing all the stuff. I was not doing all the stuff. I was like, what's on PBS today, kids? I watched a lot of Dinosaur Train. Okay. So honestly, that wasn't even that. Just like kind of as I got older, I was like, yeah, I don't want to do this.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
You're winning. Winning it like you're winning.
There you go.
Like that kid seems cool to hang out with. Is that the Bats girl, Shane?
The other one was it's freaking Bats.
Freaking bats.
Yes, on cue.
This smells delish.
Like that kid, probably not a tough hang. She seems hilarious, but like the rest, she might be. I don't know. The rest of the time, I'm just like, I don't know, man. It's not for me.
Okay.
Have you ever coached?
No. I I actually think I would love coaching.
Yeah.
I've done like little camps and like mentored stuff, but because I've always been playing, usually I'm never on the coaching end. But yeah, I would love to coach at some point. I got to figure out how to get back into soccer at some point because it's killing me a little bit.
Well, you called some games, right?
Yeah.
Recently?
Yeah, I did. I called my first ever women's soccer game, actually, which is so crazy to say, but it was for Omaha and it was last Thursday.
Mm-hmm.
Once again, I've always been playing. So when I was calling games in college, it was a baseball, basketball, and so it was never soccer. So I had to fill in randomly like 2 years ago for an NAIA tournament that was happening at Caniglia, but I've never done Omaha soccer. So that was pretty cool. That was a different perspective for sure.
Yeah, it's a totally different deal when you're like on a call.
Mm-hmm.
Everything. So I did a couple Creighton games last year. And were you play-by-play or color?
Color.
Okay.
Yep.
I don't think I could do play-by-play.
Yeah.
I feel like it's way harder.
I know. I the reason why I love sports to begin with is I love knowing everything else. Like I love being able to fill in the gaps. I love the research portion. So color naturally is just interesting to me. I've always was the person that was like seeking out more information. I want to know like who the player is off the field, that whole kind of thing. I love the dynamic, all that stuff. So color just naturally makes so much more sense to me personally. Yeah, the play-by-play definitely. I've never actually had to do play-by-play.
Oh yeah, I don't know that I would volunteer for that. But no, it's interesting when you're like actually calling a game how much different the game kind of processes with you in real time. Like I remember, I think the first game I did for Creighton last year was DePaul on Christmas. And then the next one I did was about a month later against St. John's, and they're beating the crap out of St. John's. And I'm sitting there because I'm like in every single possession. It feels like an incredibly close game to me because I'm just so deeply invested in knowing and understanding what's happening in every single individual possession that you kind of lose the flow of the game a little bit for what's happening right in front of you. And I looked up at one point, I was like, oh, they're up by like 30. And like I knew the score in my head, but it just didn't feel that way. It was super strange.
But you're also like paying attention to the other team as well. Like you have to fill in for them and fill in, despite whether you're technically maybe on a Creighton broadcast or whatever it was. Like I feel like that was my thing too last week, that I did my research and I knew about Oral Roberts and all these things, but the Omaha side, it was just second nature. It was speaking a language I've spoken for 5 years. I know what our formation is. I know what the points are. I know what the scout is. I probably could tell you what Tim was saying, right? But then you have to fill in for like how Oral Roberts is breaking us down or I was never not actively doing that like real time in a game before. Like I know what they're doing or where we're not performing, but then to be like, they're doing this really great and they're doing this really great. And then all of a sudden I'm like, well, I mean, later I was talking to some of my teammates about it and they were like, yeah, we did not perform at the level that whatever. And I was like, yeah, I guess you're right. But I was so focused on like making sure I filled in for Oral Roberts and giving them, credit and paying attention to what they were doing so well. I don't think it was definitely a different perspective, like watching it eagle eye, right? In a game, you're just, I don't know what I can't see what's not happening behind me or in front of me. So that was definitely interesting. I've done it for so many different sports during college that it was so interesting to watch that for soccer.
It felt like, and I wonder if it seems like you felt if it was really different from playing. For me, calling a basketball game was kind of the closest thing I felt to playing because you are so like lost in every possession. Whereas when you're watching as a fan or when you're coaching, it was probably closer to coaching than playing, where you're really invested in every possession and you're sometimes you need to take a step back to kind of gain perspective over the entire landscape of the game. Calling a game felt a lot like that to me.
I would agree with that because there's so many things that we did for 4 years straight that were just ingrained in my brain. They still are. Like when I watch the game now, I'm like, oh, should have stepped that way, or, her angle this way. The little things that just, I know are drilled in your head at practice. I know they've gone over it, all these things. So watching it was like kind of feeling like I was kind of at a practice again a little bit. You're like, okay, so I know probably what should happen here. I know whatever
they're trying to do.
I kind of know probably what the coaching point is here. So that was kind of fun for me just to kind of be more involved in it. And I think that's kind of where the whole conversation of coaching comes back in. I would love to, never done it, but I'm interested to see how much all those years of experience I had would translate somewhere, just to also just give me the fill that I'm missing a little bit.
For sure. Well, and it's kind of unique because you don't really appreciate how much of your previous coaches rub off on you until you're teaching someone else. And you're like, oh, you like have to make conscious decisions to differ from kind of your influences at that point.
Yeah.
I promise we will get back into Husker football here in a little bit. We have some good discussions on the YouTube comments about the quarterback position that I want to get into as well. Thomas, Fred, Dion, appreciate your input over there.
Dion.
We will get to, not that Dion. We will get to all that and more coming up next on Benning and Lulla on Hurrdat Sports Radio.
The show will be back in 4 minutes. The show will be back in 3 minutes. The show will be back in 2 minutes.
And no doubt about it, he knew it when he hit it. It is for Nolan Taylor, just one U, $350. $50.
Swing a high fly ball, right center field and deep.
The
Back
show
it goes,
will be
deep
back
it
in
goes,
1
and
minute.
way out of here. Grand slam, Matt Wallner deep to the second deck in right center. His second career grand slam. The Twins have put up a high five here in the opening inning at Target Field. It's a 5-0 Twins lead.
Edwards, Tyrone Taylor, just one U, $350.
The show will be back in 30 seconds. Hurrdat Sports presents the Damon Benning Show with Ravi Lulla.
We have an offensive identity. We're going to run the ball. Don't. I would not just confuse. In all seriousness, I would not confuse identity, like knowing what you want to do and who you are, with always having success. Like, we lined up and we tried to run the ball against those guys. If that game stays like 7-0, or if we go down on that 4th and 2 and we score and make it 14-7, we're going to continue just trying to, like, hey, they were running the ball. They were very consistent with their clips. We would have stayed with that. Once you get down 28-0, we're going to play to win. We came out, but we know exactly who we are. We're going to run the ball. We're going to run a little bit of option. We're going to play action pass here and there. We're going to try to convert third downs.
Welcome back. Kicking off hour number 2 on the Damon Benning Show with Ravi Lulla, Avarie Howard in for Damon. You can listen to us on AM 590 ESPN Omaha. You can listen to us on ESPN Tri-Cities in central Nebraska. And that ESPN Tri-Cities, you can hear that all the way through North Platte, which is where our friends at Pratt Dental are. And, Dr. Pratt has an identity. It's the only dentist in Nebraska who's certified in the BioClear method that can help correct many aesthetic dilemmas in a permanent and less invasive manner than traditional treatments. Dr. Pratt can be reached at 308-221-2800. That's Pratt Dental. They are creating healthy smiles. Let's get to the YouTube comments real quick here, Avarie. We've got Thomas mentioned that he thinks Harburg is a little bit more conducive to, we hear this term body blows all the time from Coach Rule, right? And because of his physical running style, he thinks that may be a better fit in terms of the quarterback spot, especially if Sims continues to turn the ball over, which is kind of the worst thing you can do in a slow burn offense like that. And I think it's a fair point. I don't know if this is hard to say because Sims does have a history of turning the ball over both at Georgia Tech and at Nebraska. But I don't think the snap turnovers are going to continue to be a problem. The interceptions, I have no idea, because that's kind of something that he may struggle with or has struggled with throughout his career. But just dropping snaps, I don't anticipate that being a long-term issue. And if it is, he just doesn't play, right? Like that's not something you can deal with. But if you're putting him in there to run and to do some of those things and not necessarily have him out there trying to read a defense and drop back 25 times a game, I don't worry about the turnovers with Sims nearly as much if it's kind of a specialized package of plays for him. Yeah.
I know we were discussing this a little bit. It's so tough because it was the first 2 weeks? Yeah, Colorado's the second week that we saw him play. And now that feels so long ago to me. It's almost a month ago that I wish we could see him play his first game. Like, we don't know this yet, but if he were to get snaps this weekend consistently, it'd be on the road again. I'm just curious. I wish that we could see his first, maybe more consistent snaps at home again, for a first, experience to kind of maybe regain confidence and also just see if that, not that I'm saying that should define anything, but it would just, Heinrich got how many starts at home? Yeah, 3. Again, right. Yeah. And I definitely not necessarily at the full caliber that Sims had to play against his 2 opening games.
I mean, obviously Michigan's the best team either of them have faced, but Louisiana Tech and Northern Illinois, obviously a step down from Minnesota.
And I think it gave time for Heinrich to kind of step into the offense a little bit. So my whole point of saying all that is there's a lot of other factors I think that go into it too, that maybe I don't say make it excusable, but I just am curious to see how he feels coming off the injury. 1, but 2, just also like when there was so much talk earlier and then you don't get to go back out the next week and prove yourself. You've had to wait and you've also had to watch your counterpart, put together a few pretty good, I would say impressive, at least 2 performances for the most part, when maybe everyone kind of had question marks above his head, right? Like, what's he going to actually show us, or is he just going to get us through it? I would say those 2 games he did more than just got Nebraska through it. So I'm just curious to see what translates when we do get to see him again. Will it, will the turnover thing be completely different? Will the passing percentage in general just go down? Will, the snap thing be completely different? Were those just early mistakes? Are those Jeff Sims things.
Right.
And so I think there's still a lot of question marks, but I do think there's I'm just curious when we see them intertwine collectively for the first time,
Right.
and how that goes. Because before, when he was playing, that wasn't necessarily the case. Will it help him? Will it hurt him?
Yeah, and you make a couple interesting points there. I do think the offense has largely changed in sort of dynamics since Jeff Sims went out. And I think, maybe it switches back a little bit if Jeff Sims is kind of back full time as the starter, but I don't know that they're ever going to go back to probably what I would have imagined. They were probably going to be closer to a 60-40 offensive split in terms of running and passing.
Yeah.
I don't think they're ever going to get back there. It was about 50-50, a little heavier toward passing on Saturday, but that's, they're down instantly. You kind of end up in a hole and you can't really do what you want to do there. I do think, you mentioned the Haarberg part of this too, is it's pretty easy to forget that just a few weeks ago, we didn't know if he could play quarterback at this level at all.
Right.
Right. And yes, there's criticisms of him. There's questions about, okay, how well can he throw the ball? How well can he do X, Y, and Z? But he has been, at the very least, a serviceable quarterback.
Yeah.
And that's way better than most of us were expecting.
Mm-hmm.
Because, again, last year the idea of him playing was laughed at, like actually laughed at by coaches. We know now that he was talking to the coaches about a position change. And then they specifically brought in a guy in Jeff Sims because they didn't think they had a starter in the room.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And then Haarberg comes in with all of us knowing all of those things, and it is pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
Not great. I don't know if I would put him under one of those game wrecker categories that Coach Rule put out there, but I mean, as a runner, he can be. I mean, as a runner, he can change the course of a game. We saw it against Northern Illinois and against Louisiana Tech,
Mm-hmm.
right? So can he be that against really high-level opponents like Michigan? Probably not, but I also don't know that anybody else on
I was going to say, I don't know who else. Yeah.
Right? Yeah, like I don't know that Jeff Sims is looking better against Michigan than Heinrich Haarberg did.
Mm-hmm.
I also don't know, I feel like the offensive line was a big part of that. I don't know that they got the push they wanted to in the run game at all.
Yeah.
And they fell behind so quickly that they couldn't really establish and afford. And maybe they could have been more patient than they were.
Yeah.
But they didn't feel like they could be patient.
Yeah. I think also something we were discussing before about the clip we heard opening this segment about, someone asked, have you guys figured out what the identity is going to be?
Mm-hmm.
And Roll was very quick to say, no, we have an identity.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it led us to have a conversation being of such that is identity what we see, like Roll said, being successful, but also I think as fans watching, identity being like, okay, that looks like Nebraska. We expected to see this. We're
sure
where it feels like right now it still doesn't feel that way. But on the Nebraska side of things, they know what their plan is.
Mm-hmm.
They know what they want to achieve. They know what they think is going to make them successful. I just don't know if the execution has been there. So it makes the viewer point of view have question marks. Is that really an identity, or is that trying and fails and just experimenting? Where I think Nebraska's, at least from Coach Rule's perspective, is no, we know what we want to be. That is our identity. We just haven't gotten to that level yet.
Yeah, no, I mean, that makes sense to me, because if you're taking steps along the process and you're trying to, I don't think anybody would say they've perfected their identity.
No,
for sure. I think they have an idea of what they want to do. I think they're taking steps towards that. But, and frankly, from a scheme standpoint, that identity might, and I expect will, shift from this year to next year and moving forward. But in terms of what they believe they can be, I do think they're taking steps along that road. It's just a matter of they're not there yet. And so if you take any snapshot, people do this all the time with screenshots of games where they are trying to make their point about, look how wide open this guy was, or, you can get a certain angle where it looks like a guy is just running free. And it's like, well, okay, there was a defender here and a defender here, and you just took this screenshot so it looks the way you want it to. And if you take a screenshot of the process that Coach Rule and the staff are going to, it can look a certain way because they're not there yet, right? It can look like failure. It could look like chaos because they haven't reached the point where it's a finished product yet.
Mm-hmm.
And Matt Rule would probably say, "Oh, it's never a finished product. You're always, always one of those perfectionist things, right? Where you're always working towards it. You can always get better." And he's right. But they aren't at the point yet where you feel like you can say definitively, "Oh, this is what we feel comfortable knowing they can do in a game in, game out basis."
Yeah.
I also think it's really unfair to measure that against Michigan.
Agree.
Like I think you look at their identity against Minnesota, less so against Colorado, but against Northern Illinois and Louisiana Tech, and say, okay, I can see what they're trying to do here. You measure it against Michigan, it's like, yeah, a lot of people's identities don't look good against Michigan. They're better than you are. Like, that's kind of like, are you going to measure Iowa's identity against Penn State? I mean, maybe Iowa's shown that a lot, but they're not putting up 76 yards of total offense every week, right?
Right.
That's not, or maybe a better question is, are you going to measure Penn State's defensive identity for what they did against Iowa? Probably not. They're not holding everything. Thank you, Bo. They're not putting every team under 100 yards of total offense. A lot of that's opponent dependent, right?
Yeah.
So it's also on the other side, not the most genuine comparison to do a game 5 Matt Rule team versus a year 9 Jim Harbaugh team,
right? And
say, oh, this is an apples to apples comparison, because it's really not.
I also kind of think that's when the consistency question or conversation kind of comes back into play, because, and this is something that, with the new coaching staff, players are learning this too. Their identity has changed again, so they're having to get used to that. But also, just because the game isn't going in your favor or that direction doesn't mean you now change everything that you do. And I'm not saying that Coach Rule does that, because, he preaches it. Like, just because we lost doesn't mean we change anything now.
Yeah.
So I know they're not changing things in the middle of the game. I'm just talking about in terms of performance level. Just because we've gone down 14-0, just because they've gone down, whatever, as Coach Rule was saying yesterday, doesn't mean that now our identity's out the window. That's when you have to actually perfect those things.
Yeah,
right?
That's when your identity matters the most.
Yes.
Right? When the pressure is applied, who are you? Because it's really easy to be who you want to be when things are going well, right? That's the easiest time in the world to have your identity, right? It's who are you when, and Coach Rule kind of talked about this yesterday. He's like, okay, who are we when we're down 14? Who are we when, when pressure is applied? That's when it becomes important to have an identity. And I wonder, and I asked you this off air, I wonder if in Matt Rule's head, how much of identity is actually schematic and how much of it is cultural or philosophical, right?
Yeah.
Because to me, we always talk about identity in terms of, okay, what's your offensive identity? More than anything, even more than defense, right? We don't really talk about defensive identity that often. Sometimes we talk about it with certain teams that turn you over a lot or get a ton of pressure on the quarterback or whatever. For the most part, we're talking about offensive identity.
Yeah.
And that's leaving out a whole lot of football if you're only focusing on offensive identity, right? But it's also leaving out everything that happens outside the sidelines, right? In terms of on the practice field, in terms of the mentality, in terms of the coaching, all of that kind of stuff. And so I wonder, just the way Matt Rule talks, I wonder how much of what he cares about for his team's identity has very little to do with schematic.
Yeah. I would agree with that. And I think for the most part, like, I feel like I've said this a lot since hearing him speak a lot since the spring, especially, and this is a broken record at this point, but the consistent messaging that sinks in at some point, right? And so at some point, I think you go from hearing things and repeating them because you're used to hearing it so much to finally believing it. One. And so I think the identity of this team that they can hang their hat on usually could be, X, Y, and Z. No matter who comes in this locker room, no matter if the year changes, we will do this, this, and this. And I think those are the cultural things. I think the identity stuff on the field is what I think you're right. I think I think there maybe is a little bit of a disconnect from how Rule views it versus how like media and viewers view it, because I think viewers and fans want identity as, okay, when Nebraska has the ball, they will look like this. And on third down, we know that they will execute like this. Where on defense, we know this is exactly what they're going to do. We can rely on this. And I think also you have to consider how much the media and fans have been asking those questions for years and years and years. Where for Coach Rule, he's already said this in week 2, but he's like, but this is my second game.
Yeah.
And as much as that sucks for you guys, like,
right. Yeah.
it's still a part of a process that we have to go through to establish those things. So I know it's tiring for everyone to see it again and be like, okay, what is it again? What is the offense? Like, we're not seeing any, and I think it's flow. It's like, okay, so this happened on the last drive. We're not seeing any of this on this drive, that kind of stuff, where he has like, yeah, I get the frustration, but like, we have to follow what works. Like, we can't change things up on the guys just because things aren't working. And that's what they've already been these guys have been through that so much.
Well, that's kind of the like having the conviction and like, hey, what we do works.
Yeah.
Right. And sticking with it and saying, hey, we don't have to change. We know this works. It's going to be frustrating and painful in the process, but give it time and it will work. Right. And that's part of that, is just having the conviction in what you're doing. I mean, and you kind of brought up an interesting point about how, like, the flow of the offense, right? I could make an argument that last year's offense didn't have an identity either. It's just every once in a while, Trey Palmer would go for 70 and everybody was like, this is great.
Yeah.
You know, but could they consistently put together drives? Not really.
No.
It was either a YOLO ball to Palmer or it was nothing at all, right? That was the offense.
Yeah.
It was, if Palmer can't beat you deep, they're not scoring.
Right. And I think that's the thing, is an identity that I think why those questions are asked is on a first down, on a second down, on a third down, even a fourth down. It feels like people still don't know what to expect. Like, are is everyone watching going to see an explosive play here? Probably not. We don't do that often, right? Or are they going to break off a great run? Sometimes, oh shoot, a loss of 1 yard.
Yeah.
Right. So it's, and I know that's just the game of football, but I think it's hard when you watch other teams have such success and have such a flow, have a rhythm. And when you watch their game, you're like, that is what they do. I think that's maybe where the frustration comes in. And, I think that's probably why that question, but I do think, to your point, Matt Rule's point there is, we know what we want to do. We maybe just haven't performed for you guys to be able to see
at this point, right? So this is probably going to make some people angry, because it sounds like I'm accusing people of not watching enough football, and that's not really what I'm saying. But I think sometimes people get a skewed view of what is most common in college football because they watch just Nebraska and then the national games, right? Like, if you're only watching Nebraska and then you're watching Alabama and Georgia and Michigan and Ohio State, which, to be fair, that's a lot of college football to watch. I'm not hating on people that only watch those things, right? Because that's a lot of college football. But if you're just watching the national games and the best games of the week, which those are the ones you should be watching, by the way, you have to be a real sicko to watch other stuff, but that's kind of what the job is. Like, if you're watching Big Ten West football on a consistent basis outside of Nebraska, Nebraska's plight is not uncommon. Like, there are a lot of teams. Like, I feel like I hear a lot of people saying, oh, this only happens to Nebraska. Nebraska does this, and Nebraska shoots themselves in the foot. All mediocre teams shoot themselves in the foot. All mediocre teams. And that's what Nebraska is right now. Like, I'm not trying to be a hater. Just they're a mid-level at best team right now. But all teams in that range play some really ugly football at times.
Yeah.
That's how you end up in that range. Most teams are not consistent play in, play out, whether to the good or the bad, right? And so when you only watch Nebraska and then you only watch the super high end of the sport outside of Nebraska, it can really skew what to expect from a normal football team.
I think you can throw Notre Dame in there too.
Sure, yeah. People watch
just because they're on every single week, and then maybe a Pac-12 team of some sort.
Sure, like USC. you watch USC, for instance, and you're like, oh, that's what offense is supposed to be. It's like,
exactly.
That guy's the number one pick in the draft. I don't know what to tell you. And Lincoln Riley's the best offensive mind in college we've seen in a generation. Like, generational talent, by the way. Lincoln Riley, that's it. But no, it really can skew the way you think about Nebraska, because you're watching it through the lens of national title contenders. You're watching it through the lens of, especially Michigan, right? Because it looks like how we want it to look. Michigan has the blueprint that if Nebraska looked like Michigan, everyone in the state would be so happy. And I don't just mean 2 straight college football playoff appearances. I mean, like, if they played like Michigan, right? People in the state would be thrilled.
Yeah.
And it's really difficult to kind of remove yourself from that filter and force yourself to watch crappy football games to be like, oh, this is a more realistic kind of example of the teams that Nebraska's competing against. It's the Big Ten West is really bad. Like, I think they might be the worst division in Power 5 football.
You think so?
I really think so, because neither of the Pac-12 divisions are worse.
Yeah, Pac-12 is having
the Pac-12
show. They're like,
awesome,
all right,
right?
Well, thanks for canceling us.
You got Oregon and Washington in the north.
It's been so lopsided in the Big Ten on both sides for, a decade.
Right, yeah.
At least.
Basically, since they went to the East-West model. But you go to the SEC, I think both divisions of the SEC are better than the Big Ten West.
Yeah.
The Big 12 only has the one division, I think, still. I don't know. I get confused because they seem like they switch every year. The ACC has quality teams in both divisions.
Yeah.
There's nobody in the Big Ten West that can even think about winning a Big Ten championship.
Yeah.
Like, no one in the West is beating Penn State, Michigan, or Ohio State.
No.
There's just not, right?
Yeah.
And so you have to think about it. And I get the West is going away next year, so you can't only compare yourself to the West, but those are the teams you have to get by before you can have the conversation of being in the Michigan, Penn State, Ohio State conversation, right?
Yeah.
You have to climb past the slog of Big Ten West teams, and Nebraska's not that far away from that.
Yeah.
Like Minnesota's, I get they lost to Northwestern, and that was a terrible look, right? But they were also beating the hell out of Northwestern before they allowed them to come back. Like, to give up a 21-point lead, you have to get a 21-point lead. And I think people are forgetting that part of the equation, the Minnesota Northwestern game. Like, Minnesota's about as good as it gets in the Big Ten West this year from what we've seen. I mean, Wisconsin might be a little better, but
yeah. Do you feel like we have this connotation with like the Big Ten West, and like maybe it's just because growing up in the Midwest or even Nebraska, it's like this like I don't even know, like these corn eating big boy farm.
Yeah, like the cornbread.
Yeah, and it had like this, like,
farmer boy.
Yeah, like these whatever. And I feel like it, for some reason, that just sticks in my head when I think of like Big Ten West. Maybe it's just because Nebraska,
well, it's Iowa,
Wisconsin, that I think of this just like hard nosed, like pound, like aggressive, and it's not always that, but it's not showy football.
Yeah.
And so I think that's also a difference too. Like, you go and watch an SEC, you go watch Notre Dame, like you're going to have these explosive plays like it's their job. And then you want that in Nebraska. And like I said, that's not really an identity thing, but I feel like maybe just growing up in the Midwest and just in that side of the conference, it just feels like this, hard workers, big boy, like football kind of mind. But I think for some reason, that's what I associate with that side of the conference. And it's not the showy, flashy pro style
running the ball more of a, the bigger linemen.
Yeah. It's your classic, like 3 yards in a cloud of dust, Big Ten football. Right. And what's funny is you kind of have like the best, like Michigan has that for sure.
Yeah.
I would argue, especially before Sam Hartman came along at Notre Dame, that's kind of how they played. I would argue that Georgia plays that way, but they're so skilled on the outside.
I was going to say, it's not like I don't think other people don't. It's just, I don't think, like, at least from what we've seen on the Big Ten West and Nebraska specifically, they don't have this one outlet or two outlets every time. It's like, well, we still got Travis Kelce down there.
Yeah,
like, Travis will get it or whatever.
Got Trey Palmer down there.
Totally. Like, we can at least have an outlet here and there. We still have a great fancy play back in the back pocket. Yeah,
Nebraska, and frankly, hardly anyone in the Big Ten West has that this year.
Right.
And that's why I say, like, okay, compare to Minnesota, not to Michigan. That's kind of where I'm at right now. Coming up next, we will get to some Major League Baseball with Steve Gardner of USA Today here on Benning and Lulla on Hurrdat Sports Radio.
The show will be back in 5 minutes. The show will be back in 4 minutes. The show will be back in 3 minutes. The show will be back in 2 minutes. The show will be back in 1 minute. The show will be back in 30 seconds. Hurrdat Sports presents the Damon Benning Show with Ravi Lulla.
And the 1-0 delivery hit in the air to left and deep. We got a winner. Get up. Get out of there. Gone. For Jenna Edwards. Tyrone Taylor just won you $350.
And the pitch, a swing and a high fly ball, right center field and deep. Back it goes, deep it goes, and way out of here. Grand slam, Matt Wallner deep to the second deck in right center. His second career grand slam. The Twins have put up a high five here in the opening inning at Target Field. It's a 5-0 Twins lead.
Welcome back to the Damon Benning Show with Ravi Lulla, Avarie Howard in for DB this morning. And we are joined now by our friend Steve Gardner from USA Today. He is a baseball writer. Steve, how are you this morning?
I'm doing great, as any baseball fan would be today.
I was going to say, this has got to feel a little bit like Christmas to you, right? First day of the postseason for baseball, which has a uniquely terrific postseason.
Indeed, it does, and it's unpredictable. I mean, that's the one exciting thing, or at least one of the exciting things about Major League Baseball's postseason is you never know what kind of twists and turns we'll see. You know, maybe a team like the Phillies did last year, coming from the number 6 spot and making it to the World Series.
Well, let's start there, Steve. Is there a team you look at this year, maybe from below the halfway line in terms of seeding, that you think can have a legitimate shot of at least making, if not winning, the World Series?
I think, you know, the Toronto Blue Jays might be that team. I mean, you look at the starting pitching, Kevin Gausman, I think one of the best pitchers in Major League Baseball. And the Jays this whole season have kind of underachieved in terms of, you know, they're especially on offense, that it would not surprise me to see them, you know, kind of pull what the Phillies did last year and just get exceptionally hot with Vlad Guerrero Jr. and Bo Bichette and everybody. So maybe they could be a dark horse, and I guess they're a 4 seed. So not as far back as where the Phillies came from last year, but keep an eye on them.
Yeah. Hey there, Avarie here. I got a question for you because I saw a stat from Danny Wexelman yesterday that I thought was pretty interesting. From the teams that are in the field right now in the playoffs, she said in 2021, 4 teams had 100+ lost seasons. Now it's Diamondbacks, Orioles, Rangers that are in October. For, you know, fans that haven't followed them as closely, what's really changed them around to get to where they are right now compared to 2021?
Well, I think the Orioles and the Diamondbacks have similar tracks in that, you know, because they were so bad, they were able to draft early, get their pick of some of the best young players and amateur players. And you see that manifesting itself this year with the Orioles having, you know, Gunnar Henderson, probably your AL Rookie of the Year, and the Diamondbacks having Corbin Carroll, probably your NL Rookie of the Year. And, you know, those guys have been spark plugs for their teams. And the Orioles were bad for several years. So they were able to draft Adley Rutschman, number 1 in 2019. And, you know, in my mind, he's one of the best, if not the best catcher in the game right now. So that's kind of, once the Orioles called Rutschman up, that's when their fortune started to turn. And that pipeline has just been great for them. And the Diamondbacks, you know, Brandon Pfaadt, who's going to be starting game 1 for them, is a rookie. And while the results haven't been great so far in his rookie season, he has shown some flashes and seems to be up to the task. Otherwise, you know, the Rangers taking the opposite attack. You know, they went after free agents, Marcus Semien, Corey Seager a couple of years ago, and then Jacob deGrom this past offseason. Didn't work so well, but they still continue to acquire talent. And veteran talent that has helped them make that turnaround.
Steve, are you surprised at all that it actually worked for the Rangers? Because we've seen some other teams do that, most notably San Diego, kind of trying to acquire talent that way. And it really, I mean, for San Diego, it's kind of shocking how poorly it's panned out for them.
Yeah, and the Padres had one of those crazy anomaly type seasons to where the players were actually playing well. You know, their hitting was good, their pitching was good, but they were just terrible in clutch situations. I think they went to the last week of the regular season without winning an extra inning game. They were horrible in 1-run games. So yeah, in terms of the way that Texas has built, I think, you know, that's been one of those things where they pick the right guys, you know, and it's easier said than done. But you know, Marcus Semien has been amazing. Corey Seager, if it weren't for Shohei Ohtani, would probably be the AL MVP this year. And they made some smart moves in picking up players in trades. So yeah, it's a credit to that front office there in Texas that they've been able to do that. Chris Young, the GM, has continued, you know, what's been a fine tradition of front office moves for the Rangers.
Steve, out of the teams that were those 100-loss teams that Avarie mentioned that are in the playoffs now, which ones do you think are built for sustainability? Is it kind of the Orioles and Diamondbacks that did it through their farm system? Do you think they can hold on to this core group of players to have a several year run?
I do. I really do. And I think that's key when you have those young players and, frankly, inexpensive players. It gives the front office the opportunity to patch some holes where they need to. And I think one of the things, for Orioles fans, they kind of saw this coming a little bit when the team was playing a lot better at the end of last year, and were disappointed that Kyle Gibson and Adam Frazier were the only guys that they went out and got in free agency, when there were other players like Carlos Rodon was one of the most sought after starting pitchers, and yet they stayed away from him, and the Yankees signed him, and it didn't work out so well. So yeah, I think being able to have that core in place and several more really good young players coming up through the farm system, which we may get a glimpse of in the postseason, that helps you be sustainable and allows you to continue to have that kind of success. And most baseball insiders and observers feel like this Orioles team is certainly built to last, and the Diamondbacks in that regard as well.
Yeah, speaking of the Diamondbacks, seeing all the celebrations and the pool parties and all the fun things, this means a lot to them. What makes this team so exciting and maybe hopeful to watch in this October run for them?
Well, I think they've been overlooked a lot this season because in the National League West, you have the Dodgers who are always there. A lot of talk centered on the Padres.
Mm-hmm.
The Giants, had a 107 win team a couple of years, or 100 plus wins. Was it 107, something like that? Huge number a couple years ago. So they kind of overshadow the Diamondbacks, and you don't really have, other than Corbin Carroll, anybody that posts ridiculously eye-popping numbers or anything like that. But guys like Christian Walker, who's a veteran who's been around for a long time and is just starting to get his due. Blue guys like that, Ketel Marte, not your household names. I think maybe if you talk about anybody from the Diamondbacks, it's Zach Gallen, who was the All-Star Game starter for the National League. He's probably the most recognizable, but still, you think about the best pitchers in baseball, and Zach Gallen's not one of the first several that comes to mind. So I think this could be a coming out party for them as well.
Steve, real quick before we get your World Series picks from you, in that NL MVP race, it seemed like it was Acuna and Betts for a long time. Did reaching those 40-70 milestones just put Acuna in a category where he can't be caught for that thing? I'll
tell you what. No is the answer for
that. Okay, good. I love Mookie Betts.
At the start of September, I was actually in the camp that Mookie Betts was more valuable than Ronald Acuna Jr. because obviously all that he means in terms of stats and puts up some pretty good numbers himself, but being able to move from the outfield to the infield to give the Dodgers the flexibility, to me, that's what you talk about when you talk about valuable to a team. But Betts kind of tailed off a little bit in September. Acuna kind of stepped on the gas and just blew up. And then getting those numbers, I think it reminds me a little bit of the AL MVP debate back when Mike Trout was a rookie and Miguel Cabrera won the AL Triple Crown. I mean, you pick three stats and you say, well, Miguel Cabrera was better than everybody. But in terms of everything else that he did, Mike Trout was a more valuable player to me that year. And I think Mookie Betts had that same kind of argument, except that Acuna just continued to be amazing in September. And I think is going to win it pretty much going away.
Got 20 seconds here left for you. Who wins the whole thing this year?
Atlanta and Acuna just look too powerful to me.
Yep.
So I think the Braves over Tampa Bay I'll pick.
Okay.
Steve Gardner from USA Today. We appreciate your time, Steve. Great stuff.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
That's our friend Steve Gardner from USA Today. Coming up next, we've got more of Benning and Lulla here on Hurrdat Sports Radio.
The show will be back in 4 minutes.
one's picked. Back the other way, Witherspoon. Devin Witherspoon cuts back. What a night for the rookie. You think they love him in Seattle? How about 6 points? Touchdown Witherspoon, no flags.
The show will be back in 3 minutes.
This one's
The show will be back in 2 minutes. The show will be back in 1 minute. The show will be back in 30 seconds. Hurrdat Sports presents the Damon Benning Show with Ravi Lulla.
This one's picked. Back the other way, Witherspoon. Devin Witherspoon cuts back. What a night for the rookie. You think they love him in Seattle? How about 6 points? Touchdown Witherspoon, no flags.
We are wrapping up hour number 2 on the Damon Benning Show with Ravi Lulla, Avarie Howard in for DB, and we are on AM 590 ESPN Omaha, ESPN Tri-Cities as well. We're joined now by Robert Rosenthal of IlliniBoard.com. Robert, how are you doing this morning?
I am good, guys. How are you?
Oh, we're doing all right. You sound a little down. Does that have anything to do with what happened over the weekend?
Might have a little something to do with that clip you just played and the fact that Devin Witherspoon is in the NFL.
That's Shane's fault. I don't run the clips. No. So, Robert, let's start there. Obviously, there was a decent amount of NFL talent that left Illinois for the NFL last year, but you also lost maybe the best defensive coordinator in the country to Purdue as their head coach. How much of what you've seen this year do you think is due to the attrition from the players versus just the coaching change on that side of the ball?
I would say that because the issue has been mistakes, dropped interceptions, penalties, holding penalty on third down, like that type of thing, because the issue has not so much been the defense as has been shooting themselves in the foot. I would say a lot of it has to do with the youth. It just has to do with you had 3 defensive backs taken in the first 3 rounds of the draft. And the replacements, it will just take time before those mistakes go away. So, so far from what I've seen, now obviously, Illinois goes to Purdue and loses to Ryan Walters 44-19. That doesn't say much about anything, but that doesn't bode well. But the way that they've been losing, the way that drives have been continued with penalties, and the offense is, stalling after a good 60-yard drive, the way it has happened, it appears so far to be youth.
Yeah, on that defensive side, though, it seems like Miles Scott has led the way for this team. Has he kind of been a bright spot on the defensive side of the ball so far this season?
Definitely, and especially since he was a wide receiver last year. I mean, This is a kid who's a walk-on who, had 7 or 8 catches last year as a wide receiver, and then flips sides of the ball and starts as the free safety and has a pick-6 already. But yeah, it's just been in the off season. They knew obviously they were losing everything from the secondary, and they threw everything at it. They brought in 6 defensive backs as freshmen. They brought in 3 transfers, 3 FBS transfers. They moved 2 guys from offense to defense. They added a couple walk-ons who have contributed a bit. They have tried everything of like, well, let's try transfers, let's try freshmen, let's try moving guys, just to throw it at the problem. Miles Scott has been solid, but there's been, issues just about everywhere else.
We're talking with Robert Rosenthal of IlliniBoard.com. Robert, I was talking to our mutual friend Evan about Illinois recently, and he brought up to me how much the time of possession down almost 5 minutes year over year. That was a huge part of the way Illinois was able to grind teams to a halt last year. How much do you think that is kind of with the O-line maybe not playing as well as they did last year and being able to establish that run game? How much of it is just missing Chase Brown at that running back spot? Or it almost seems like maybe they're trying to air it out a little bit more with Luke Altmaier. Which is it kind of a combination of all those things, or what do you pin it on?
No, I think that's exactly right. The identity last year, and people saw this if they were at the game in Lincoln, the identity of Illinois last year was you're going to convert 3rd and 2 because you have Chase Brown, and he's a tough runner, and he's going to pick it up, and you trust the offensive line. So you're not really worried too much about your drives. You're trying just, get your yards. Most of the passes were right at the line of scrimmage. There's this fantastic Illinois stat from last year that Isaiah Williams had. I'm not going to have the exact numbers in front of me. He had something like 814 receiving yards and 790 were yards after the catch, which means I believe he caught passes of his 80 catches. There were like 32 yards beyond the line of scrimmage. And this is, it's one of the most incredible stats I've ever seen.
Yeah.
In that he's catching balls that are a pass, but he's catching them 3 yards behind the line of scrimmage and then taking off.
Yeah.
When you add it all up. So it was that offense, right? You don't take any risks. The passes travel 7 feet before they're caught. You hand the ball off. You're not risking any turnovers. And if you have to punt, you punt because you trust your defense that nothing's going to happen. And, oh, by the way, the defense is going to have 25 interceptions. So they're going to be a real good way to advance the ball down the field. So, that was the identity. With that gone, they're still struggling to figure that out.
Yeah, I want to talk about Isaiah Williams. Actually, interesting stat as you bring up. This year, he's just shy of 500 receiving yards, but 0 touchdowns. Is that kind of an interesting disconnect when you look at it on paper?
Yeah, that does kind of describe how they use him. Pat Bryant is the guy for the corner end zone route, and that type of thing. I've always described it as Isaiah Williams is a running back that lines up on the wing, and they will get him the ball there and have him start in a little bunch formation off to the side, or they'll get him on little curls or little things underneath, get him the ball, and then see what he can do. Now he's caught deep balls and he's caught jump balls, and they're doing more with him this year than they did last year. It's not going to have the same stat, but yes, they use him in a way that it's almost like a running play. You're just, I'm kind of dumb, but I describe it as like Inspector Gadget at quarterback. It has a really long
an extended handoff type deal.
Yeah, exactly. So he just snap the ball and then extend the ball all the way to the sideline and hand it to the wide receiver, and then he takes off from there. That's how they use Isaiah Williams.
Robert, I'm kind of been interested about the play of Luke Altmaier at quarterback, obviously the transfer in this year. And, you look at the numbers, 5 touchdowns, 7 interceptions, and you go, I don't know that I love that, but that's pretty heavily skewed by the 0 touchdown, 4 interception game against Penn State. Last 2 games has thrown the ball pretty well, hasn't had any interceptions. How would you grade his performance so far this year?
I mean, it's been the play of a sophomore, I think. It's been what you might expect from a sophomore. He had 1 start at Ole Miss before he transferred. So this, his first start this season was his second ever start. As I've talked to people about it, Illinois got a lot of great quarterback play from Tommy DeVito last year. Syracuse fans looked at that and were like, wait, what happened to the Tommy DeVito that threw a bunch of picks and that wasn't accurate? Well, they got the sophomore Tommy DeVito, and Illinois got the 5th-year senior Tommy DeVito.
Sure.
And, we've seen that so many times across college football. Well, Illinois right now is just experiencing the sophomore mistakes of a quarterback who will make a great play and will make a great read and a 40-yard run. And then if you saw the beginning of the Purdue game, they're in a third and short. Purdue bites on the running play. There's a tight end who no one covers. He's open by 15 yards. And Altmaier threw a bullet instead of a floater and sailed it over his head. And so it's just that kind of thing. He learns from that moment. The next time he has the wide open tight end with nobody within 20 yards of him, he's going to underhand the ball. He's going to realize the only way I could screw this up is to throw a bullet. But it's just those mistakes that are happening right now.
Looking forward to this weekend, both a response game for Nebraska and Illinois. From what we've heard from Coach Rule so far this week, it seems like he's kind of challenged his team. Last week, he called ridiculous against Michigan. What's been the messaging from Coach on your guys' end, and just kind of what the response may look like this weekend?
Yeah, I mean, I heard the stat from another reporter, Illinois reporter on Saturday, that this was Bielema's worst Big Ten loss. Wisconsin, Illinois, anywhere, he had never lost by this much. So I think the response is probably similar to what Coach Rule felt walking out of that Michigan game of look, this isn't at all what we have in mind for this program. And it's time for some, I believe the quote from Bielema on Saturday was hard conversations, not only with players in the lineup, but with his coordinators, with his player rotation and getting some of the younger guys in there. It's going to be that kind of week for Illinois. So it sounds like that's similar to how Nebraska is approaching this.
Robert, real quick, we have about 90 seconds here. You mentioned Coach Bielema talking about some of those hard conversations with coaches. What do you think kind of on a little bit more specific level are some of those issues that he wants to address?
I mean, I would say it is 90% mistakes. The yards that Illinois has put up, I follow this one stat called success rate, which is just, are you getting half the yards you need on first down? Are you getting third down conversions? How successful are you? Take out everything else. How successful are you moving the ball? And this is Illinois' best so far success rate on offense in 10 years. They're moving the ball and then throwing a pick. They're moving the ball and then stalling out on 4th and 1. They're moving the ball and then missing a field goal. So it's all the other stuff. It's the holding penalty that makes it 1st and 20, that makes it an impossible drive. It's those things that are killing them, and not specifically not punting much. They're able to get the ball down the field. They just can't score. That's the issue.
That's Robert Rosenthal from IlliniBoard.com. Robert, it's a pleasure as always. We'll talk to you again soon.
All right. Thanks.
Really appreciate Robert Rosenthal from IlliniBoard.com there. Before we close out the hour, I want to tell you about our friends at Dingman's Collision Center. 4 great Omaha area locations, been in business for over 25 years here in Omaha. Family-run local business, and they've got the latest technology. You can get any make or model service there. Also, great give back program. Check out dingmans.com for more. More of the show coming up next.
We will be back in 4 minutes. We will be back in 3 minutes. We will be back in 2 minutes. We will be back in 1 minute. We will be back in 30 seconds. Hurrdat Sports presents the Damon Benning Show with Ravi Lulla.
Some guys have to step up. Like even in that game, once Deshaun went down, Tommy, who's been playing both ways, had to go play the whole game at corner. Then, Newsom had to go in and play at safety. So Phelan really played well. He came through for us. So this week, I think because we have some time to do it, like Kobe Bretz is a guy that can play football. We need Kobe to play well. We need Phelan to step up and play well. Tommy's the guy who's been playing both ways. He needs to help us at corner too. Some young guys that have been kind of in that red shirt mode. DeAndre Barnes is an excellent young player. He's been practicing with the twos. He's ready to go now if we need him. So some of those injuries, could maybe affect us. I think Lenhart, we have a chance of getting back this week. So obviously that'd be a big thing for us. Mackay has been playing that jack position. He went back last week and played middle linebacker. So just some different things like that. Hopefully we can settle down this week and really lock some guys into roles.
I never had a time to make a way.
Kicking off hour number 3 here on the Damon Benning Show with Ravi Lulla, Avarie Howard in for DB this morning. Want to remind you about our friends over at Warhorse Sportsbook. They are the best place in Nebraska to place your sports bets. You can do it in person at the casino in Lincoln. They've got all of the kiosks and sportsbook tellers you could want to place your wagers, or you can download the Warhorse Casino app. They've got live odds. You can build your bets anywhere, then go to the casino, scan the QR code at the casino, and place your wager there. Warhorse Sportsbook, no bets, no glory. And joining us now on the Warhorse Sportsbook hotline is our friend Mike J. Schaefer. Schaefer, how you doing this morning?
I'm doing well. I feel like after the last couple of weeks that, to keep this going, you should start talking about how poor Tua played against Buffalo on Sunday. So we can keep that rolling.
I
3
thought
weeks
about
in a row here.
I thought about firing off a shot on Twitter, but I didn't want to. I would like to still be friends at some point, Schaefer. And so
I think it's well deserved. I mean, I did not treat you fairly last week, and so to keep the feud going, that's what the people want. We got to keep the heat on this thing.
Well, and the funny thing about it is, I actually think Tua is currently a better quarterback than Trevor Lawrence. The funny thing about the whole thing is I think he plays the position currently better than Trevor Lawrence does. And so I get painted in this corner because people like to misunderstand my statements that I think
willingly sometimes for me.
Yeah, I think actively and joyfully in your case, choosing to misunderstand my statements.
I would never.
I think that's the most on-brand thing I've ever described about you. But no, it's I actually think Tua's good, but I get in this position where I have to hate on him to make my point, and I don't like it, Schaefer.
Okay.
Don't put Ravi in a corner.
I will work on that from my end, but I can't promise anything because my personality. So
yeah, sometimes your better angels lose out, which is I think happens to the best of us here. Schaefer, I guess let's start off with the Michigan game and move on as quickly as possible. But I guess it seemed like Coach Rule viewed that game a little differently than I did. I saw it as, I agree with that, Coach Rule. I thought it was about a pretty large talent gap between Michigan and Nebraska. And it seemed like in his comments, he thought that if Nebraska executed better, then they probably would have been. It seemed like he thought they'd be in that game. Is that what you saw? Is that Coach Rule just trying to instill confidence in his team? How did you receive those comments versus what you saw?
I think those comments seem to be directly made towards his team more than probably the game itself that was on the field on Saturday. I'm with you. I mean, I felt like the discrepancy is pretty big. And some of it even, I don't know how well execution is going to go when at one point in time you have 2 true freshmen playing on your defensive line against, a veteran offensive line of Michigan when Nash Hutmacher goes out. So, that's just where they are as a program. They just don't have the depth. They don't have the discipline. I mean, that's probably the thing I would be the most frustrated about if I was Matt Rule. You're 5 games in, you still have needless penalties, and you look across the field, right or wrong, Michigan didn't get called for anything. But more than that, they didn't have procedural penalties. They don't jump off sides. They don't have false starts. So those are the things that would bother me, I think, because I look at that game. I looked at that game going into it. There's an extreme talent discrepancy. If Michigan plays the way that they want, it's going to be really hard for Nebraska to stay in it because they're not built to aggressively attack areas that Michigan is just simply better than them at. So, the game kind of played out in a worse version of what I expected. I thought Nebraska would hang around for the first half and then would get distance in the second half. But as we've seen sometimes, regardless of coach, Nebraska has a tough time getting out of the first quarter, and that's essentially what happened on Saturday.
Ravi asked me this earlier, and it was after we heard that clip that we played before this about, just coach kind of calling out his players a little bit. We said, you don't know how much that was really for the media and for the fans. It kind of felt like it was more directed towards if the team's listening right now. I guess it's two questions here then. One, who do you think he may specifically be speaking to without naming names? And two, who do you think steps up this weekend after what seems like Coach Rhule's been challenging the guys this week?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that there is any one player specifically that, he wanted to hear that message. I think it was more of a collective thing.
Right.
And, if we were going to get into different position units that really probably need to take that to heart, you'd start with the offensive line. I mean, they had a terrible game. That was, again, it's so hard because it's hard sometimes. We really want to dive into every football game and really kind of, pull its guts out and examine it. And sometimes, you just face a team that's significantly better than you are in every aspect. And that's really what Saturday was. So I don't want to be like overly hard on any position group because you're at such an extreme disadvantage at times. But Nebraska's offensive line largely picked some of the worst occasions to completely fall apart. And Saturday was one of those. I mean, whether it was Turner Corcoran when he was in, Teddy Prohaska, I mean, I think we saw pretty strongly why Teddy has not been playing. He just does not look like he is ready to be a Power 5 tackle at this moment. And that's tough to watch. Like it felt like, and he had to go in. I mean, it's an injury, but it felt like in some ways they were protecting him from that because they've been seeing it. And then, Bryce Benhart took his turn. And it just feels like Nebraska is an offensive line without a tackle. And they've got to figure out, 7 games. So I think in some ways you're challenging those guys. Okay, we know that you're not going to be phenomenal. We know this isn't going to be an all Big Ten offensive line. But these next few games, we are going to have to ride our offensive line. We are going to have to ride the run game. We're going to have to be able to run a competent offense. And that starts up front. And I feel like they really took a huge step back over the weekend. Some of that's Michigan. Some of it's just them. So if there is any position group that I feel like needs to step up significantly going into this month of October, where you have so much opportunity in front of you, you need that offensive line to kind of get back to more of what it was doing earlier in the season. But you don't know if that's just the opponents. Like, I mean, Colorado wasn't going to put a lot of stress on them. Minnesota's defensive line didn't put a lot of stress on them or their second level. So I think Illinois can do that. I know Purdue can do that. So it's going to be a big month ahead for this offensive line. So I guess if I was assuming anyone was going to have to heed that, call out, it would be up front with that offensive line.
Schaefer, how much do you think of the offensive line struggles? I mean, obviously you've got, some guys getting banged up and putting Prohaska in a spot that maybe he's not ready for. But how much of it do you think has to do with the fact that they got behind super early and kind of were forced to pass the ball maybe more than they wanted to? And the pass protection is where they've sort of struggled all year, right? Like that hasn't been – the pass pro has not been great all year.
Yeah, the game flow definitely didn't go how they would have wanted. And I think that's something that's more manageable in the next 7 games than it certainly was against Michigan because, as you said, you get, that touchdown right away to start the game. You have the interception leads to a touchdown. You're in a 14-0 hole. And the running game, pretty evident, wasn't going to go anywhere early. So they did have to pass more. And that certainly makes it look probably worse than if you're able to kind of control the flow of it. But the thing is, like, there's going to be another game this year where you're going to need that pass protection to hold up in the second half because you're going to be chasing points. You're going to have to get, you're going to have to throw. You're going to have to find creative ways to protect for Heinrich Harburg. But I don't want to dwell on it because a lot of it was Michigan. but some of it is just like incredible to me that there's so many starts up front. Like, we're not even talking about an inexperienced offensive line in the slightest. This is a very veteran group.
Yeah.
It's veteran for the entire conference. And at some point, it doesn't matter whether they have game experience because it's just not going well. And I don't think there's an easy fix. So you're kind of stuck with what you have. But there's no question in my mind, Nebraska as a program is incredibly limited until its offensive line gets better.
Schaefer, I wanted to ask you real quick about Teddy Prochazka before we move on to other topics. How much of his struggling do you think is directly injury related and him coming back from having not played very much football in a really long time? And how much do you think, I mean, from my understanding, he's continued to grow. He's I think a full 6'10" now.
Mm-hmm.
Like, how much of it's just impractical for a guy that size to kind of get in some of the spots he needs to?
I think we're in that territory, sure, with just being able to move laterally and all of that. But what I almost wonder, you go back to that North Dakota game last year, and this is one of the most honest, and I don't want to weaponize this against him, but it's one of the most honest answers I think I'd ever received when talking to a player. And he said he mentally was not in a good enough spot to be playing in that North Dakota game. And like, that's a really, your left tackle saying that, like, that's a scary thing. And so I wonder, because shortly after that game, you have Georgia Southern, then Oklahoma, he gets hurt, he's out, he's done. I wonder if some of it is rust. I wonder if some of it is just mentally he's not where he wants to be, or he's not where he was when he was a freshman, when he was able to just go out and play. And now he's in his head and he hasn't been able to get out of his head. Like, I wonder if there isn't more of that. And we haven't talked with him. So, when he gets the opportunity to talk and he can, discuss that, I don't think he spoke after the game on Saturday, and he might be talking today, but we'll see. So, some of it he's going to be able to clear up and he can talk about that to a degree. But I wonder if it isn't still a little bit rust and then mental.
Fair.
After the game this Saturday, you said that Heinrich Haarberg, earned the right to be the starting quarterback. No looking back. What makes you so sure, even though we've heard Coach Rule kind of talk about or hint towards maybe using a 2-quarterback system in the future if Sims is back to 100%?
Yeah, well, I mean, it makes sense because they're probably going to need both of those guys just with the way they have to play, and injury being a real threat, especially with Jeff Sims. But for me, a lot of it has to do with, you look at everything that Nebraska's struggling with and struggled with on Saturday. Heinrich Haarberg was not the issue. I mean, you could make a long list of things that didn't go well on Saturday. And yeah, he wasn't great, and everyone wants to talk about the arm slot. But at one point, he was 10 of 12 for 140 yards. He threw for 199. That's the most that Michigan's allowed. That's not great. Like, I'm not trying to throw him a parade down O Street over here. But I think when I look at what he's done in 3 games and the fact that he's healthy, and that's something that I don't know when we're going to be able to say about Jeff Sims. I think his mobility has been kind of severely impaired. And I don't know, if we're talking weeks, days, what, for him to be back to where he can open it up and run. I don't want that limitation with my quarterback. And I don't know that there's a big enough gap for me with Sims and Haarberg that I would immediately go back to Sims if he was at 80%. Like, I like what we've seen from Heinrich Haarberg. I'd continue to give him that opportunity. Again, you have to view the month of October as if Nebraska can sweep this. They're giving themselves the best opportunity to play in a bowl game. And right now, I think the best opportunity to win games for them is the quarterback that's played the last 3 weeks. Just kind of like Prochazka. When you get Sims back, there's going to be some rust. There's going to have to, then he's going to have to get in the flow of an offense that was disjointed before, he exited the first time. So I would rather stay with your status quo at the moment. You figure out how you're going to put together game plans and win with Heinrich Haarberg. And I don't think he's been the issue for this team and this offense the last 3 weeks. He had his struggles against Louisiana Tech. They're severely limited because of their skill position players. But I've been completely fine with Haarberg. I was a little surprised. I probably shouldn't have been a little surprised by the pushback on it. I definitely don't think we're talking about Heinrich Haarberg for the next 3 years as Nebraska's starting quarterback, but to at least get you through the month of October into November, I think he should be the guy.
Well, and I guess I'm kind of thinking about this. Is there an area where you think Sims is clearly better than Haarberg? Like that's part of it too, right? They're not totally different, and even if physically maybe they're a little different, they're not totally different in terms of what they bring to the table.
Yeah, the only thing I can think of would be situational, right? Because Jeff Sims has played significantly more football at this level. He's been in situations that Heinrich Haarberg hasn't yet. And so when Haarberg's in the fourth quarter and you're down by 3, how does he respond to that? What does it look like when it's loud on the road and he's got to be able, he's only had starts at home. That's really the other thing with Haarberg. So, obviously he played against Colorado. He led that touchdown drive. I don't think these are like huge, big concerns, but I think a lot of it's just sort of situational. But right now, I mean, I don't know that I could sit here and tell you that one guy is going to be better throwing the football than the other based on what we've seen and based on what Nebraska has on offense. And again, if we're defaulting to the best skill for each is their ability to run, I'm going to go with the guy who hasn't had the leg injury or the injury so far this season. And I mean, I don't know that there's much that separates them as runners either. And Haarberg hasn't turned it over the way that we saw from Sims in those first 2 games. Now, is it fair to hold that against him? No, not entirely. But I also don't know that I'm clamoring for a change for the sake of change either. So I don't know that there's a lot that separates it. And I would rather move forward with the guy who's been playing, I think is really what it comes down to.
Schaefer, you kind of mentioned the situational experience that Jeff Sims brings to the table that Haarberg doesn't, but could I make the argument that so far this year, Sims has looked more like the seasoned quarterback, or at least more kind of in control of what's happening out there than Sims has?
That Haarberg has looked more in control?
Yeah.
I would agree with that. I thought that on Saturday. I mean, he looked comfortable. Obviously, Nebraska put up 7 points, and he wasn't part of those 7. So I don't want to oversell what Heinrich Haarberg did in a game in which effectively they were out of it by the middle of the first quarter. But he looked comfortable at times in that role. He looked comfortable in that first game against Northern Illinois. Really, it's just that stretch against Louisiana Tech where there's some misfires on throws. Where it was the only time that he hasn't really looked like he's in command of things. Like I don't think people on the offense are questioning like, why is this guy the quarterback or anything like that either. I mean, I think he looks comfortable and is playing comfortable in those roles. Now we did see, and Matt Rule did talk about that 4th and 1, him leaving his feet, something that he would have preferred he didn't do. He wants Heinrich Haarberg to play like Heinrich Haarberg and not to attempt to be someone else, those kinds of things. But for the most part, I would agree, Jeff Sims looked really skittish at times against Minnesota. And then I can't, I don't want to hold this entirely against him. It was one game. I still feel like some of the decisions in that game were so baffling that it's hard to believe that's the guy that has the 30 starts or more. And, Haarberg was the guy who just had his first 3.
Yeah, I think that's totally fair. Kind of moving ahead to Illinois and what you expect to see there. Obviously, this is an Illinois team that's really struggled through the first few weeks of the season. Obviously, coming off of that really tough loss to Purdue, didn't play well against Kansas or Toledo, even though they got the win against Toledo. I guess, what are you expecting to see from this Illinois team that has sort of, we just talked to an Illinois writer a little bit ago, has sort of departed from the identity that saw them be so successful last year. What are you expecting on Friday?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's going to be interesting for Nebraska defensively because Illinois hasn't run the football well this year, and their best asset might be their quarterback run game with Altmaier. Like there's been several times that he's been their leading rusher, and we haven't really seen a team do that a lot to Nebraska. I was worried about JJ McCarthy's legs coming in. Turns out he didn't really need them, other than to extend the play a couple times, especially on that nice touchdown right at the end of half. But I wonder if that isn't an area where Illinois will emphasize. But I think this sets up as a team that Nebraska can certainly play well with, because I don't know that Illinois is doing anything particularly great on offense at the moment. Like it might be another similar kind of game to Minnesota where it's a struggle for both teams at times to put points and to move the ball, because neither offense is probably good in any sense, conventional or unconventional. So because of that, I think, it sets up to be a very Big Ten West football game. I think Nebraska's defense will respond well after last week. I'm not worried that that's some sort of long-term thing for them. That felt more like Michigan had their day and Nebraska just wasn't capable of hanging around there. But I think they should be able to recover fine against Illinois in that regard. And then Illinois makes a lot of mistakes. They've been very sloppy this year. And so we've talked about Nebraska needing to take advantage of those things. This feels like a game where, yes, you're on the road, and yes, it's a weird, Friday night thing, but let Illinois be the team that beats itself, control what you can control, don't try to do too much. But it feels like this is an Illinois team that when you watch them, they press and they make these sort of mistakes. And I mean, looking at that box score last week, I have no idea how they lost by 25 points. The numbers are almost identical, except for they were horrible on third down. So, that's an area where Nebraska's defense hasn't been very good this year. So they're going to have to, if they can keep Illinois from advancing on drives, that, seems to be a huge bugaboo for the Illinois offense. They don't have a great go-to third down weapon. And life is very different for Illinois without Chase Brown. That's what it really feels like.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, because looking at the matchup and then also just talking to a writer a few minutes ago, between the mistakes and just kind of when you look at the matchup, not a lot of strength in the backfield for Illinois anymore after all the departures, and then just kind of Nebraska situation, Illinois' offense identity is kind of shaky. Do you see this being a bigger opportunity for the defense kind of to respond, or for Nebraska to take advantage of Illinois' defense, which comes in last in almost everything in the Big Ten right now?
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely correct. It's an opportunity for both sides of the ball. The one I think I have more confidence in showing up and taking care of the job would be the defense. I think they'll respond well after that Michigan game. I think Tony White's a good coordinator. He'll have those guys ready to go. And they have done a good job against teams that are flawed. I mean, they've taken stuff away from teams that don't do things well. We saw that with Northern Illinois. We saw that with Minnesota at times. So, I think the defense will show up and respond well. With the offense, it's always tough because you don't know how and what they're going to emphasize. We don't know Anthony Grant really in this situation either. Like, is he going to be able to rip off big runs like he did against Louisiana Tech? Or is it going to be a non-factor like he was against Michigan? I mean, I think he's kind of a critical piece in this whole week.
That's Mike J. Schaefer of Husker 24/7. Look, we played nice. We didn't even get into a fight today.
Yeah, look at us. We're grown men. We're adults.
Look at us. Friends
work,
again.
guys. Good work.
Just like you pretend to be when I join your podcast. No,
absolutely.
That's Michael J. Schaefer, Husker 24/7. Schaefer, we appreciate it, bud.
All right, guys. Have a good one.
Thank you.
See, and I didn't even make any jokes about his Minnesota Vikings. And you're still here. Sorry.
Thanks, Ravi. They won. What were you going to joke about?
No, I was going to say,
dominating performance.
How's it feel to get off the schneid?
It feels really good.
That's Schaefer.
Kansas City.
They're gonna get smoked. Coming up next, we will have the Zipline Sports Six Pack here on the Damon Benning Show with Ravi Lulla on Hurrdat Sports Radio.
We will be back in 5 minutes. We will be back in 4 minutes. We will be back in 3 minutes. We will be back in 2 minutes. We will be back in 1 minute. Hurrdat Sports presents the Damon Benning Show with Ravi Lulla. Time now for the Sports Six-Pack, presented by Zipline Brewing Company, makers of Dear Old Nebraska Brew, the official beer of Nebraska alumni.
Welcome back to the Damon Benning Show with Ravi Lulla. Avarie Howard in with me today, and we are getting you ready with the Zipline Sports Six-Pack. Remember, their Dear Old Nebraska brew is designed by and for University of Nebraska alumni, although you can drink it no matter where you went to school. An easy drinking American lager. It's perfect for tailgating, enjoying the good life in all kinds of weather. Available in cans and on draft. Come out here to Hurrdat Sports Bar while you're watching the Husker game and have a Dear Old Nebraska brew. Shane, let's get cracking.
Question number 1.
If I gave you the choice of winning the next 4 games and becoming bowl eligible, but losing the last 3 games of the season, or winning Wisconsin and Iowa, but there are no other guarantees for the season, which would you choose?
So basically, the option is you go 6-6 with a 4-game winning streak followed by a 3-game losing streak, or you win Wisconsin and Iowa, but those might be your only wins. They might not be. We don't know.
Win the 4. make the people happy, go to the bowl. But you never know. Maybe the Iowa-Wisconsin games could be really competitive, close losses.
Sure.
Moral wins there. But you already have the bowl. You already have the other wins. 4 straight. I don't know the last time that's happened. So it's
been at least Scott Frost never won 3 straight. So it had been 2016 when they won, I think, 7-0 to start the season. So it's been 7 years since they won 4 games in a row.
2016 started the season 7-0.
I think it was 7-0. They were, I think, in the top 10 in Mike Riley's second year. And then they lost 2 of their last 4, or they only won 2 games going out. So I think they ended up 9 and 4.
You're right. Yeah, I think I would do the 4.
I would too. The bowl game, I think, is really important this year. Not just for morale of the fan base and the team, but also you get an extra month of practice for what Rhule's trying to do this early on in the process. That's pretty important, I think.
I'd say.
To me, the idea of ending the game on a 3-game losing streak, and if you lose the bowl, a 4-game losing streak, I don't love. But I think making it to a bowl is more important than that.
Yeah, because also what happens if what was the other part of it? Like, is it you either win 4 or you don't know what happens at the others, even if you won the last 2 or last 3?
Basically, so you could win Wisconsin and Iowa, but you could lose all of the rest.
Like, what if you had 4 really bad losses?
That's what I mean, right? Like, I'm not taking that risk. I want the 4 wins. Take me to a bowl game.
Yeah, lock it in.
All right, lock it in. Shane, what's next?
Question number 2.
Is emo Jimmy Butler a good look?
Did you see emo Jimmy Butler yesterday?
Yeah. What are our thoughts on this?
It's not for me. I don't want to be. I mean, it's a bad look. I don't know what to say. I don't want to be overly judgy. If he likes it, like, go for it. It felt like he was doing a bit.
I think so. Well, they did like a compilation on ESPN yesterday, like all of his like media day looks. This one's just interesting.
So he did like the
braids, long braids last year. Yeah.
So yeah, like it's a thing with Jimmy Butler. If he likes how he looks, I go for it. But that's a tough look for
you know
Jimmy.
What's funny about the topic of this? Do you happen to see our team's whole entire staff group chat yesterday?
No, I didn't.
Some way or another, the topic of emo got brought up.
Yeah.
And there's some pretty sick pictures in that chat.
Really?
You better take a scroll.
Is it on Teams?
Oh yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna have to get in there.
Like us, I love our office because, as Sasha would say, she walks in, she's like, "Hey kids, like good morning." Even though we don't treat it that way, it's kind of we have a split a little bit. And it was funny. The older generation, we'll put it that way, in the office all had some awesome pictures from early 2000s. They sent in.
This leans right into the next question. Shane, go ahead.
Am I on 3?
Yeah, on 3.
Oh, great.
Question number 3.
Do you have a particular style choice from your past that has not aged particularly well?
Like one you're not real proud of in retrospect.
Yeah. Yeah, probably the way I parted my hair.
Because we all went through some phases, right?
Yeah. Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
Before like in high school, it was like just everyone had it over here. It was like this whatever, and it didn't seem like a big deal.
Yeah.
And now I look at pictures and it's like,
you're like, what's happening
comb
there?
over? I don't know. I also just like didn't get my hair colored, and it just looked like I just looked interesting. It just was this. Yeah, I don't know. I also, because of the emo topic, I think we were like in my high school years, like they're bringing back the choker a little bit.
Oh yeah,
but they were trying to be trendy with it.
Yeah.
And now it haunts every picture. It was like the triple wrap one, like it had like some like something on it. Like it would be a really cute sweater, and then you had this like 3 wrap choker, and it's in every picture. Yeah.
Yep. So mine's probably worse than that. Are you familiar with the soul patch? So when I was in high school.
Wait, do you like did a thing all over the jeans thing?
No.
Oh.
So soul patch is like a reverse mustache. It's when you've got the little patch of hair under your lip.
Oh, nope.
And that was it's a bad look. It doesn't look good on anybody.
Okay.
But it was very popular in that time frame. So don't love that. I do have some style choices I stand by. I still to this day think I look great in a puka shell necklace. And I will die on that hill. I'm just waiting. Like everything else from the 90s is coming back. I'm just waiting for the puka shells to come back, and I'm going to crush those.
Move to the West Coast. I'm sure they're still there.
Listen, you can find them. I've looked. Don't get me wrong. I'm just waiting.
There's probably more people rocking them.
Yeah. It's just
you'd fit right in.
They look really good with my kind of like tropical skin tone. Like it's a nice contrast there.
Yeah.
What's next, Shane?
Question number 4.
What current Huskers names would make the best dog names?
So what current Husker, you take their name, name your dog after them. Are you a dog or cat person? Any pet person?
Oh, I'm a dog person.
Okay.
Cats, no. Hard X.
I used to not be a cat person, but my wife got us a cat. His name's Potato, and I love Potato.
That name might be kind of cool. Hard X.
I feel like we have a good.
So there's a couple that came to mind immediately for me.
Okay.
And the reason I thought of this question, so one of my dogs is named Roggy,
okay,
after Ethan Roggy for Creighton back in the day.
Okay.
I also have a dog named Doug, but not named after Doug McDermott.
Okay.
His name is, full name, Douglas Fir Lulla. He's named after the pine tree.
Lulla.
Because he was they got up the full name. Because he was a Christmas present to my wife, so he got the Christmas tree name.
Actually, I have the roster right here. Yeah.
But so the couple that popped in my mind immediately were Chief Borders.
Chief. Okay, I was
Chief's a terrific dog name.
Go Chiefs.
Nash, I feel like
Nash,
is a good dog
Nash
name.
was the first one that came to mind for me.
So those were the ones that I was like, okay, those are good dog names.
Not Chubba.
Those. Chubba's a really good dog name. I forgot about Chubba. That's terrific dog name.
You could do short of Prince Will and do Prince.
Ooh, Prince Will's a good dog name.
It's just long.
It is. But you shorten those things up.
Yeah, for sure.
Chubba's a great dog name.
Yeah.
I kind of like Phelan as a dog name.
Teddy.
Teddy's a good dog name. Kind of more classic.
For sure.
Yeah.
I know we definitely have some fun ones on here. And now that you asked me, I'm thinking of all of them, so I'm thinking of none of them. Yeah, I think we got some good ones.
Or you could go Sanford. I feel like Sanford would be a good
That's
dog
a good
name.
one. Yeah, I like that.
All right. I think we landed on Chubba, though. That's the best one.
Yeah. Chubba or Chief?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Yeah, for sure.
Shane, what's next?
You know what name I'm going with.
Oh, what's that? Oh, Omar.
Omar.
He loves Omar. People think he named him after The Wire.
5.
Go ahead, Shane.
If you could attend one sporting event next year, what would it be?
Like anything?
Yeah, anything. It doesn't have to be. You don't have to be covering it. It can just be anything you want. Mine's the Kentucky Derby. I've always wanted to go to the Kentucky Derby. It's a super bougie event, which is right up my alley.
Yeah.
I want to wear like the crazy over-the-top suit, like the
fit.
whole thing, the whole seersucker thing. Like I want drink some mint juleps, have a whole thing. Like Kentucky Derby's an easy answer for me.
This is such a hard one for me because I feel like it really factors like if a team that I enjoy or cover, or I shouldn't say cover, like or fan of is in it.
Yeah, let's say independent of your teams. So just the event itself.
My mind like goes to the Super Bowl, but I just feel like when you're there, it's such a production.
Yeah.
That it doesn't really feel like a real true like based on like what I've heard.
That's
like a
why
fan
I don't-
experience.
yeah.
I don't like. I feel like you're like, okay, what big ones have I not been to, or like which ones would I love to go to? But like that doesn't really come to mind.
That's why I'm hesitant with like the Final Four because it's like a whole thing.
Okay, I think I'm kind of thinking I
Final
would want to
Four
go
before
to
Super Bowl.
Final Four, especially if KU is in it. I think World Series.
Yeah, a World Series game would be a great.
I do that. I think no
'Cause
matter
you still get the home atmosphere.
that, and it's just like I got to experience it at Kansas City, and I've never experienced like
Anything
an
like it.
atmosphere like that. Yeah, I can only imagine. I'm sure you still replicate that no matter what the fan base is.
Oh, for sure. We will have to punt on the 6th question. Shane, you can drink your 6th one during
Was it a
the
good
break
one?
there. It was okay. We got through the best one.
Okay, good.
I try and put them in order of best
Okay.
to worst so
Okay.
that we don't miss out on any good ones.
Oh, I'm finishing my 6.
I know you're going to. You like to get your drink on over there. We will get our conversation on with Jeff Ermann of Inside MD Sports coming up next on Benning and Lulla.
We will be back in 4 minutes. We will be back in 3 minutes. We will be back in 2 minutes. We will be back in 1 minute. We will be back in 30 seconds. Hurrdat Sports presents the Damon Benning Show with Ravi Lulla.
Here comes the all-out blitz. Tagovailoa to throw. Heaves. Left corner. End zone. It is caught along the sideline. In play. Touchdown.
Oh, wow.
Octavian Smith got his foot in. NC State wants to see the replay, but what a grab.
Got a white boy on my roster. He be feeding me pasta and lobster.
Wrapping up the show here. Sorry, Shane's bump music really threw me off there.
Okay.
We're wrapping up the show here on the Damon Benning Show with Ravi Lulla, Avarie Howard in for DB this morning. I want to tell you real quick about our friends at Rockbrook Camera. They're not just about selling you a camera. They're about helping you become a real photographer and the best photographer you can be, whatever that means for your life, whether you're just trying to record your memories or taking professional pictures. Rockbrook Camera has you covered. They'll support you after the sale, and they've got great technology, all the newest technology you could possibly want. You're just trying to try some things out or just need something temporarily, you can rent from them, or you can trade in your old gear to upgrade. Go to rockbrookcamera.com to learn more, or visit them at 168th and Center in Omaha or 70th and Pioneer in Lincoln. Joining us now to talk about the Maryland Terrapins is Jeff Ermann from Inside MD Sports. Jeff, how are you this morning?
I'm doing well. How are you?
You're probably doing a little better than we are, covering a 5-0 football team. You've got a certified actual real-life quarterback back there as well, which must be nice. I guess coming into this season, what were your expectations versus what's played out so far, a little less than halfway through the season?
Yeah, I mean, I think the expectations were that they'd get off to a good start, whether it was 5-0 or 4-1. The schedule's been very favorable early on. They've been big favorites in pretty much every game so far, but they've looked pretty good overall. They have a few flaws, but I think they've obviously lived up to what everybody expects. Now it's a matter of, can you go ahead and beat at least one of these big three, Ohio State, Penn State, or Michigan, to really make it a great season.
Hey there, Avarie here. I got a question for you about Coach Mike Loxley here and just the incremental success he's had year after year being the head coach. Now, we're kind of going through that here with Coach Rule and just him being a developmental program and talking about how, it takes time and there's a process. But, 2019 went 1-8 in conference, 2-3 in conference, 7-6, and then last year 8-5 overall. Just, what do you think's led to that success and just kind of buying into that process from the players?
Yeah, he's taken his time with it. He's developed a new culture. The culture was not great when he arrived, so it took a while to transition. He's also a really good recruiter. He's the best recruiter, arguably Maryland's ever had between this stint and the previous 2 times he was there as running backs coach and offensive coordinator. He recruited a lot of their best players, guys like Vernon Davis and Sean Merriman. So the talent has really been upgraded significantly, the athleticism, and then, the biggest thing is probably Talia Tungavailoa coming in. Maryland hadn't been able to find a really good quarterback. Quarterback's been a major issue for them for years until he arrived. So he's been the biggest piece of the turnaround.
Jeff, you mentioned Tungavailoa, and he's obviously gotten off to a really good start this year, just 3 interceptions and 13 touchdowns. It's the kind of efficiency there in terms of the interceptions had been a little bit of a concern the last 2 years, 11 and 8 interceptions respectively. Has he done something that you've noticed that's changed his ability to not make those mistakes, or is it sort of just, hey, it's early in the season, we haven't really seen it all yet against this level of competition?
Yeah, a big chunk of it is definitely the level of competition. They haven't really been challenged. He does look a little more comfortable back there. They have a new offensive coordinator, Josh Gaddis. I think the play calling has been improved, and that's helped him a lot. And he's not forcing as many things. He's had a few moments where he was, but he's not forcing as many things as he was before. So he just looks a little more confident and relaxed back there this year than he has in previous years. But for the most part, he's fairly similar to the guy that we've seen before.
Outside of Tungavailoa, who has really stepped up on the offensive side of the ball? Maybe somebody that you weren't quite as sure about heading into the season, because Tungavailoa was kind of a known commodity, but not everybody else on the offensive side of the ball was.
Well, last week it was Ty Felton, a receiver who they've felt like was really talented for years, was stuck behind some bigger name guys. He had 3 touchdowns last week, all and over 100 yards for the first time. So he's the guy who stepped up. But, overall, there hasn't been a guy who's really busted out because they spread the ball around so much. No one is really able to post gaudy stats. Caden Prather, a receiver transferred from West Virginia, he's been good, but that was expected. So there hasn't been a big surprise. I would say really the biggest surprise might be that Roman Hemby, their running back, isn't putting up, big numbers like he did last year. But otherwise, it's hard to pinpoint one guy because they involve everybody.
You talk about just the strength of schedule, not really challenging Maryland so far this season. You have a big challenge this weekend in Ohio State. What do you see being those biggest challenges for this team that is 5-0, has a lot of confidence, but maybe hasn't faced a test like Ohio State yet?
Yeah, I think the big challenges will be on defense. Defense has been good statistically. A lot of that is because they've forced a ton of turnovers. I haven't looked at where they are this week, but heading into the last game, they were tied for second nationally in turnovers. So that's kind of masked some issues, up front and also in pass coverage. So I think that's going to be a big thing. Can the defensive line hold up? Ohio State's offensive line hasn't been great, but they still always have so much talent there. Offensively, I think they should be able to put up points. The offense is really good. There's a lot of playmakers, as you mentioned. Tungavailoa is playing really well. So to me, I think the biggest challenge would be defensively, just limiting Ohio State, keeping them from going up and down the field, especially because they're coming off a bye week and have had plenty of time to prepare.
Jeff, I'm always curious about teams that have kind of an outstanding quarterback, and especially when they're kind of the key to a turnaround the way Tagovailoa has been with Maryland. How do you feel that once Tagovailoa moves on from Maryland, are they set up to be successful past that, or are they going to be pretty dependent on bringing in another guy at that level?
Yeah, that's the $1 million question. You know, he's been so important for them in this turnaround. And I think that there's a chance you could drop off a little bit without him. Obviously, anytime you lose the star, you know, quote unquote franchise quarterback, that's always a possibility. But I do think Loxley's built a program up now to where it's more attractive to recruits. You know, expectations inside the program are higher, disciplines improve, things like that. So, you know, I don't think that they'll just completely fall off or fall back to the struggles they were in before Talia arrived, but it's definitely a valid question.
On the defensive side of the ball, I'm going to go back to that just because it's seen so much success this season. Do you think it's been a change in identity and just buying into it? Or what do you think has led to just, I mean, outside of the turnover ratio, but like just what's led to the dominant defense this Maryland team's also seen to supplement that offense so far this year?
You know, I mean, defensive coordinator Brian Williams has done a great job since taking over. Maryland was perennially in the bottom 1 or 2 in the Big Ten in a lot of defensive stats. They've been much better. The adjustments he's made have really worked consistently. I mean, I think there's some stat like they're allowing 2.8 points per game in the third quarter during their last 10 games. So he's been really good. And then he just has been how opportunistic the defense has been. You know, they've just been piling interceptions. Tarheeb Still, a cornerback, has 3 interceptions. He's been really good. He's a little bit banged up heading into this week, but, you know, so they're hoping he'll be able to go because they're fairly limited at cornerback. But, you know, the big story has just been the turnovers, to be honest.
Jeff, not to look past Ohio State, but as you kind of look at the rest of the season as a whole, what do you think are reasonable expectations for Maryland the rest of the way out?
I think it's a team that should win 9 games. You know, there's several winnable games on the schedule. Illinois, Rutgers, I think the game out there at Nebraska is probably, you know, a 50-50-ish kind of game.
You're so generous. We appreciate that, Jeff.
Yeah, you know, going out there, I wouldn't be surprised unless you guys lose out or something like that. I wouldn't be surprised if Nebraska's favored or it's a really close line. You know, it's a long way to go for Maryland. They haven't typically been a great road team. So, you know, I think it's 9 wins is a very realistic goal. And, you know, if you can take care of the ones that you're supposed to win and pull off one upset among the big 3, then it's, you know, a dream season.
Jeff, last question before we let you go here. What's a kind of a storyline with this team that you're monitoring locally that maybe those of us outside of the area haven't paid much attention to?
That's a really good question. To me, the biggest thing is actually off the field is with recruiting, because they've recruited pretty well over the years, done really well in the transfer portal. But that's the big question to me. Can they parlay this good season into then getting a higher level caliber of player that you're getting, and then that kind of propels it to where you're avoiding that letdown after this season. So, you know, that's not on the field, obviously, but I think in terms of looking at the program from above, that to me is a big question. Can you capitalize on this year and get some recruits you wouldn't have gotten in previous years, and, you know, use that to kind of find more upward mobility, rise up the Big Ten?
That's Jeff Ermann, InsideMDSports.com. Jeff, we really appreciate your time. We'll talk to you again soon.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Terrific stuff there from Jeff Ermann. Again, InsideMDSports.com. Make sure you check out his work over there. Avery, how do you feel like it went? That was your first full show. How do you feel?
Went great.
You feel good?
Yeah. Thanks for making it so easy.
I didn't scare you off or anything. We're okay.
No.
Well, hopefully we'll have you back sometime and we can do this again. I had a good time. I know Shane had a good time over there. He likes talking to people other than me, so I'm sure
that's true.
I'm sure he's happy to have some new faces around here as well. That's all for today on the Damon Benning Show with Ravi Lulla. Thank you genuinely to Avery Howard for joining me here today. We will be back tomorrow with more of the Damon Benning Show with Ravi Lulla on Hurrdat Sports Radio.